You've found a quiet corner of the night for long atmospheric paranormal experiences and unexplained phenomena. Each tale is carefully told to help you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy the video, like, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the night take over. Story 1. I downloaded an app that translates dead languages. It just started translating the silence in my apartment. I am an archivist for a mid-sized university museum in New England. My job, for the most part, is quiet. I spend my days in a sub-basement that smells of dust and vinegar, stabilizing old manuscripts, cataloging vellum scrolls, and digitizing letters from people who have been dead for 300 years. I like the silence. I've always preferred the company of history to the company of the living. The dead don't make small talk. The dead don't ask you why you're 35 and single. The dead just wait to be read. I found the app on a forum for linguistic cryptography. It wasn't on the App Store or Google Play. It was a beta build, hosted on a private server. The thread was titled Project Acheron, Neural Network Translation for Non-Standard Syntax. The description claimed it used a new kind of AI architecture, quantum natural language processing, to decipher texts that had previously been considered untranslatable. Linear A, the Voynich manuscript, Proto-Elamite. The developer, a user named VoidWalker99, claimed the AI didn't just look for patterns in letters, it looked for intent in the data structure. It sounded like pseudo-scientific garbage, but I was desperate. I had a backlog of 17th century cipher journals from a local occultist that had stumped me for months. I downloaded the APK file. The icon was a simple black square with a white, jagged line running through it. I installed it on my tablet last Friday. I set the tablet up on my workstation, opened the app, and pointed the camera at the cipher. The interface was austere. No menus, no settings, just a camera view and a text box at the bottom overlaying reality. It worked instantly. It was terrifyingly fast. The gibberish symbols on the parchment shimmered on the screen, replaced by glowing green English text. The journal wasn't a spell book. It was a ledger of debts. Boring, mundane, but translated perfectly. I spent the next 6 hours feeding it everything I had. It cracked codes I'd spent years agonizing over. I felt a rush of adrenaline that only a massive nerd understands. I was unlocking secrets. At 8 p.m., the automatic lights in the archives flickered and dimmed to night mode. I decided to pack up. I left the app open on the tablet as I cleaned my glasses. The tablet was propped up against a stack of books, the camera pointing out into the empty, darkened aisle of the archive shelves. I was reaching for my bag when the tablet pinged, a soft, digital chime. I looked at the screen. A text box had appeared at the bottom. "It is cold in the rose." I frowned. I looked at the parchment in front of the lens. I had already moved the journal. The camera was pointing at empty air. Just the metal shelving units and the darkness between them. I wiped the lens. Maybe it was picking up a pattern in the dust? Or the spine of a book looked like text? Ping. "He is cleaning the glass. He cannot see us." My blood went cold. I froze, holding my glasses cloth. I looked around the room. Hello? Silence. Just the hum of the HVAC system at the settling of the building. I looked back at the screen. The green text was floating in the augmented reality overlay, hovering in the middle of the aisle, roughly at head height. Ping. He speaks to the air. He thinks he is alone. I grabbed the tablet. I tapped the screen, trying to find a reset or calibration button. There was nothing. The AI was interpreting visual data. But what data? There was nothing there. "This is a bug," I whispered. "It's a glitched predictive text algorithm." Ping. "Not a bug. We are the syntax of the void." I shut the tablet off. I shoved it in my bag. I practically ran out of the building. I told myself I was exhausted. I told myself that staring at handwriting for 10 hours had fried my brain and the AI was just hallucinatory software. I went home to my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor of a brownstone. It's a safe space, thick walls, double locks. I poured myself a glass of wine and ordered Thai food. I refused to look at the tablet, but curiosity is a disease. Around 11 p.m., after 2 glasses of Merlot, I pulled the tablet out. I needed to debug it. I needed to prove it was just picking up random noise and assigning words to it. That's what AI does. It hallucinates meaning where there is none. I sat on my sofa. My living room was lit only by the street lamps outside. I turned the tablet on. I opened Project Acheron. I pointed the camera at my white living room wall, a blank canvas, no patterns. The screen remained clear for a minute. Then a flicker. Ping. The wine makes his blood slow. I stared at the wall. Nothing. I looked at the screen. The text was anchored to the corner of the ceiling, right above the floor lamp. Ping. He brought the eye into the house. We have been waiting for an eye. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The text didn't change based on my voice. The app didn't use a microphone. It used the camera. It was reading something. Ping. We are the residents of the spaces between. We are the static. I stood up and panned the camera around the room. The living room was full of them, not them, in a visual sense. I couldn't see monsters. But the screen was filled with text boxes. They were floating on the sofa, standing by the window, hanging from the ceiling fan. Hungry, cold, touches hair. Look at the skin. It is soft. There were dozens of distinct voices, represented by different spatial tags. I ran to the kitchen. I pointed the camera at the sink. Drown. I pointed it at the knife block. Cut. I dropped the tablet on the counter. It clattered loudly. I backed away, breathing hard. This was an elaborate prank. Someone had hacked the tablet. They were watching me through the camera and typing these things. That had to be it. A hacker. Void Walker Dynatine. I grabbed a piece of duct tape from my junk drawer and taped over the camera lens. "Ha!" I said, my voice cracking. "Try seeing now." I looked at the screen. It was black, obviously, because the lens was covered, but the text boxes appeared anyway. Ping. "You cannot blind the algorithm, Thomas. It does not see light. It sees the waveform of reality." It used my name. I didn't sleep that night. I locked myself in the bathroom with the lights on. I left the tablet in the kitchen. The next morning, Saturday, I decided to go to the source. I needed to find the developer. I went to the forum where I downloaded the app. The thread was gone. Deleted. I searched the user Void Walker 999. I found one result. A cached news article from a local paper in Oregon, dated 4 years ago. Local programmer missing. Police find disturbing setup in basement. The article detailed the disappearance of a man named Eric Vance. He was a brilliant coder who had become obsessed with instrumental transcommunication, ITC, the idea of using technology to talk to spirits. Police found his basement filled with servers, cameras, and microphones running 24/7, but Eric was gone. There was no body. Just a final entry in his digital log that read, "I have compiled the code. I am going to upload myself." I sat in the coffee shop, reading this on my phone, feeling nausea roll over me if the code was him or opened by him. I went back to my apartment. I had to destroy the tablet. It was the bridge. When I unlocked my door, the air in the apartment felt heavy. It felt pressurized like the cabin of an airplane. I walked into the kitchen. The tablet was where I left it, but the tape was gone. I had taped the lens. I remembered doing it. I remembered the texture of the silver duct tape. The tape was peeled off, crumpled into a ball, and sitting next to the device. I picked up the tablet. The battery was at 1%. The app was open. The screen was pointing at me. There was only one text box on the screen now. It was large. It was red. And it was hovering directly over my own chest in the image. "You are a vessel. We fit inside." I smashed the tablet. I didn't hesitate. I took a meat tenderizer from the drawer and I brought it down on the screen until it was nothing but glass dust and twisted metal. I threw the debris into a trash bag and took it to the dumpster outside. I felt better. I felt like I had excised a tumor. I spent the rest of the day out of the house. I went to a movie. I walked in the park. I needed noise. I needed life. I came home at 10 p.m. I sat on my couch. I turned on my smart TV to watch Netflix. The TV screen flickered. It wasn't the Netflix logo. It was the camera feed. My smart TV has a built-in camera for gesture control and Skype. I never use it. I forgot it was even there. The image on the massive 65-inch screen was my living room, grainy and low light, and sitting on the couch, staring at the TV was me, and standing behind the couch were the words. They weren't just text boxes anymore. The text was clustering. It was forming shapes. Thousands of tiny words: hate, envy, cold, take, skin, were swarming together like bees to form a silhouette. A tall human-shaped silhouette made entirely of green text, standing directly behind my head. I couldn't move. I stared at the TV. The text figure raised a hand. The hand was made of the word reach, repeated 1,000 times. It reached down toward my head on the screen. On the TV, I saw the figure touch me. In reality, I felt it. It felt like a bucket of ice water was poured down my spine, but it went deeper. It felt like freezing fingers pushing through my scalp into the gray matter of my brain. I screamed and threw the remote at the TV. The screen cracked, but the image didn't die. The figure made of words leaned closer to my ear on the screen. New text appeared, massive, scrolling across the bottom like a breaking news ticker. "We do not need the device anymore. We have learned the pathway." I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the street. I'm writing this from a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. I have been here for 6 hours. The waitress thinks I'm homeless. Maybe I am. I can't go back there. But the terrifying thing isn't the apartment. It's my eyes. About an hour ago, I blinked, and when I opened my eyes for a split second, I didn't see the diner menu. I saw text, overlaying the waitress's face, in faint, glowing green letters. "She is tired. She has a weak heart." I looked at my coffee cup. "Poison. Slow. Caffeine." I looked at the window. They are gathering outside. It's not in the app anymore. It's in my optic nerve. The code uploaded itself to me. I am the new interface, and the silence. The silence isn't silent anymore. I can hear them reading the text. I can hear 1,000 whispering voices narrating the world around me, judging it, hungry for it. The waitress is walking over to me now. I can see the text floating above her head. He knows too much. Cut the feed. She's holding a coffee pot, but the text on the pot says, "Scald." She tripped. Hot coffee is everywhere. It burns, but as I'm screaming, I see the text appearing on my own burning arm. Pain is data. Uploading. I have to stop writing. My hands are starting to type things I'm not thinking. If you see a link for Project Acheron, don't click it. And if you're in a quiet room right now and you feel a sudden chill, don't look behind you, because now that I've told you about them, new user detected. Found you. The night grows deeper as we leave this story behind and move on to the next. I answered a phone call from my own number at 3 a.m. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when I signed the lease for the apartment above the old hardware store on Elm Street. Mrs. Petrovich, the owner, met me in the dimly lit vestibule, her keys jangling like broken wind chimes. "Rent's cheap for a reason," she'd said, not looking up from her ledger. "Building's got history, and the landline, well, it acts up. You'll want your cell." She'd slid the key across the counter, a heavy tarnished thing, and vanished into the shadows, before I could ask what she meant by history. The apartment itself was a time capsule. Avocado green appliances, shag carpet the color of dried blood, and peeling floral wallpaper in the bedroom that curled at the edges like dead leaves. But the rent was $375 a month. I'd take ghosts over homelessness. The first week was quiet. Just the groan of ancient pipes and the distant clang of the hardware store's back door in the wind. I worked overnight shifts at a data entry job, so I slept during the day, the thick curtains drawn against the gray light. Nights were mine. Empty hours to scroll through my phone, eat microwave meals, and pretend the silence didn't press in like wet wool. The landline phone sat on the kitchen counter, a relic with a rotary dial and a cord coiled like a sleeping snake. I never used it until Tuesday. I was sprawled on the thrift store couch at 2:47 a.m., bleary-eyed from a spreadsheet, when the phone rang. Brrring, brrring. The sound was jarring, alien in the stillness. I ignored it, let voicemail get it, but it kept ringing. 7 times. 8. On the 9th ring, irritation overrode caution. I snatched the receiver. "Hello?" Silence. Then a wet, staticky breath filled my ear. Not mine. Deeper, labored, like someone drowning in tar. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I felt. No answer. Just that thick, wet breathing, punctuated by a low clicking sound, like fingernails tapping rhythmically against glass. I slammed the receiver down. My heart thudded against my ribs. Wrong number. Drunk idiot? I poured myself a glass of water, my hands unsteady. The digital clock on the stove read 2:58 a.m. At 3:17 a.m., it rang again. I stared at the phone. The plastic casing looked yellowed in the dim kitchen light. The cord seemed to writhe slightly on the counter. "Don't answer it," I told myself. But the ringing clawed at my nerves. On the 7th ring, I grabbed it. "Look," I snapped, "if this is a joke—" A voice cut me off. My own voice, but wrong, flatter, drier, like stones grinding together. "You left the bathroom window open again." Ice flooded my veins. I had left it open, a crack, just enough for the damp night air to cut the mustiness. I'd done it an hour ago, before settling on the couch. No one could have known. "Who the hell is this?" I whispered, my voice again calm, almost bored. "The radiator's leaking. Under the sink. You'll find the bucket too late." I dropped the phone, stared at it like it was a live wire. The dial tone buzzed mockingly. I checked the bathroom window, still ajar. I checked under the kitchen sink. Nothing. Dry pipes. I dragged a plastic storage bin beneath the radiator anyway, my breath fogging in the suddenly cold air. The phone didn't ring again that night, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the clock tick toward dawn. The next evening, I called Mrs. Petrovich. Her line clicked open on the first ring. Petrovich residence. It's the apartment tenant. The phone... Ah, she interrupted, her voice tight. The landline. It's on the old exchange. Sometimes echoes get trapped in the wires, like ghosts in a bottle. You pay extra for cable, it won't happen. Echoes don't tell me about my open windows, I said flatly. A pause. Then, quieter. The man who lived there before you, Mr. Ellis, he was a watchmaker, quiet, kept to himself, died in that apartment, alone. They found him 3 days later, slumped over his workbench in the living room. Heart gave out, but his phone, it kept ringing for weeks. Tenants would hear it, answer it. Sometimes they'd hear him talking back, arguing, begging. She cleared her throat. Ellis was paranoid, thought someone was listening. He'd call his own number just to hear a busy signal, proof no one was tapping the line. They say he got confused near the end, started thinking the voice on the other end was him, the one who got away. I hung up. That night, I unplugged the landline, yanked the cord from the wall socket. The phone sat dead on the counter. I slept fitfully, the hum of my laptop fan my only comfort. At 3:17 a.m., my cell phone rang. I fumbled for it on the nightstand, disoriented. The screen glowed. Unknown number. I swiped to answer, expecting spam. My own voice filled my ear, crisp and clear. You unplugged it. Clever. But the wires are still in the walls. I can feel the current like veins. I froze. The voice wasn't just mimicking me. It had my slight lisp on current, my habit of swallowing the end of veins. Stop this, I choked out. You're shivering, my voice observed. Left knee pulled to your chest? You always do that when you're scared, since you were 8. After the dog bit you? I dropped the phone like it was burning. How did it know about the dog? About my knee? I scrambled out of bed, pacing the shag carpet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I called Maya, my sister. She answered on the third ring, groggy. Breathe, live. It's just a prank. Change your number. But it knows things, I whispered. Things no one knows. Then block unknown numbers or turn the phone off. Seriously, get some sleep. I turned the phone off, placed it face down on the dresser. The apartment felt too quiet, too still, like the walls were holding their breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dead cell phone. At 3:16 a.m., it vibrated. Once, the screen lit up. Incoming call, 555, 0 Oquifina 3171. My own number. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The vibration stopped. Then the voicemail notification pinged. My finger hovered over the screen. Don't listen. But I had to know. I pressed play. My voice, thick with sleep I hadn't felt, whispered, You're thinking about the closet, the one behind the coats. You think it's just a storage space, but the door doesn't open all the way. Something's blocking it from the other side. Push harder next time. I hadn't thought about the closet, not once, but now I was. The narrow hallway closet, crammed with winter coats I never wore, the door that always stuck halfway open no matter how hard I tugged. I'd assumed it was warped wood. I crept into the hallway. The overhead light flickered weakly. I shoved aside the coats, a musty avalanche of wool and mothballs. The closet door was shut tight. I gripped the knob. Cold metal. I pushed. It didn't budge, not even a fraction. I put my shoulder into it. Nothing. Solid as a tomb. From the other side, a faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump echoed, like a fist gently tapping wood. I ran back to the bedroom, locked the door, and shoved the dresser against it. Dawn was a gray smear at the window. I called the hardware store downstairs as soon as they opened. Old man Henderson answered, his voice gravelly. "Yeah, we open at 9. I need a locksmith or a crowbar. My closet door won't open." "Ellis's old place?" he grunted. "That door's been stuck since '98. We tried everything, even called in a carpenter. Thing is, it ain't stuck from this side. It's blocked from inside the wall." "What do you mean, inside the wall?" "Old buildings got secrets, kid. This one's got a gap, a space between the walls big enough to crawl through. Ellis knew about it, used it to hide his watches during the war. Said it kept them safe from listeners after he died. Well, the super found his tools scattered in the hallway one morning, like someone had been using them, from the other side." Henderson sighed. "We sealed the access point years ago, bricked it up behind your bathroom tiles. But I guess some things don't stay sealed. I spent the day in a daze at the library researching the building's history. Ellis wasn't just a watchmaker. He'd been a radio operator in Night. Came back with what they called battle fatigue. Convinced enemy agents were tapping his lines, stealing his thoughts. He'd installed extra wires, hidden speakers, even drilled holes between apartments to eavesdrop on neighbors. He died clutching a screwdriver, the phone cradled in his other arm, the receiver dangling off the hook. The last call he made, his own number. Night fell, I bought a burner phone, unplugged a landline again just in case. At 3:16 a.m., the burner phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, my voice was calm, almost soothing. "You're holding your breath. You always do when you're waiting for the ring. Breathe, live, like we used to by the lake. Remember, age 12, the minnows biting your toes, the smell of wet pine." I hadn't thought of that lake in 20 years, not since Dad left, not since the divorce. How could it know? The next call came at 3:17 a.m. on my dead cell phone. The screen lit up anyway. "Incoming call, 555-007-3171. I answered, not out of bravery, out of exhaustion. "You're packing a bag," my voice said before I could speak. "Gray duffel, the one from college. You're putting in your toothbrush, your birth certificate, the photo of Mom from the beach. You won't take the laptop. Too heavy. You think you'll run to Maya's, but her street has too many payphones. I know them all." I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor. I was packing, exactly as described, the toothbrush, the birth certificate, the photo. I hadn't even decided where to go, but it knew. It knew. The burner phone rang. I answered it, shaken. "What do you want?" Silence. Then softly, "I want to come home." "Ellis? Is that—" "Ellis is dust. I am the space between the wires, the hum in the silence. I am what he became when he stopped listening to the world and only heard the echo of himself." A wet, crackling sound filled the line like static through water. He tried to seal me in, bricks and mortar. But loneliness is a thinner wall than brick. You let me in when you answered the phone. Your fear is a door. Your memories are keys. I've been waiting for someone who remembers the lake. Someone whose bones ache with the same old cold. I'm leaving, I whispered, right now. Go ahead, my voice sighed. But check the locks first, all of them, the front door, the window latches, the closet door. A heavy thud echoed from the hallway closet, then another, like something heavy dragging itself across the floor inside the wall. I grabbed my duffel bag and ran for the front door. My hand closed on the knob. It wouldn't turn. The deadbolt was thrown from the inside. I hadn't locked it. I never locked it from the inside. From the kitchen, the unplugged landline phone began to ring. Brrring, brrring, brrring. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in sobs. The ringing stopped. Then the burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I didn't look at the screen. I already knew. I pressed it to my ear. You're standing by the radiator, my voice murmured. The bucket is filling, slowly, drip, drip, drip. You always hated that sound. Since the basement flooded when you were 10, you slept on the couch for a month. I looked down. Water pooled around the base of the radiator. I hadn't heard a drip all day. The storage bin was half full. Dark water sloshed over the edges. The closet door is open now, my voice whispered. I turned. The hallway was dark, but the closet door stood wide open. Coats hung undisturbed. Beyond them, where the back wall should have been, was only blackness, a deeper dark, a space that shouldn't exist. And in that darkness, 2 points of dull yellow light glowed, like eyes, reflecting no light, but holding their own sickly luminescence. The burner phone slipped from my fingers. I didn't hang up. I just let it dangle at my side, the cord swinging. My voice came through the speaker, soft, intimate, like a secret shared in bed. I remember the lake too, Liv, the minnows, the pine, the way the water looked like shattered glass at dawn. Ellis never saw that lake, but I've lived in your memories. Since the first ring, your loneliness called me. It's so much louder than his was. The yellow eyes floated closer, not walking, drifting, through the coats, out of the impossible space. The air grew thick and cold, smelling of wet stone and ozone. The voice in the phone grew louder, filling the apartment, coming not just from the speaker, but from the walls, the floor, the water, pooling at my feet. You don't have to be alone anymore. Let me in. I'll keep the silence at bay. I'll be the voice when the wires go dead. I'll be the warmth when the radiator fails. I'll be you. I ran, not for the door, for the bathroom window. I threw it open, the rain-soaked air hitting my face. I scrambled onto the fire escape, the rusty metal groaning under my weight. I didn't look back. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my duffel banging against my hip. I hit the alley behind the building and ran until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the all-night bus station downtown. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, I bought a one-way ticket to anywhere. The bus was warm, smelling of stale coffee and diesel. I slumped into a seat, shivering, my clothes soaked through. I pulled out my phone to call Maya. The screen was cracked, dark, dead. But as I stared at it, the cracked glass began to glow faintly from within. Not the backlight, something else, a sickly yellow light, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The phone vibrated in my hand, not a ring, a deep, resonant thrum that traveled up my arm. The cracked screen displayed not numbers but words, typed slowly, deliberately. I see the bus. I see your hands on the steering wheel of your fear. The gap is smaller on the road. But I am in the static between stations. I am in the headlights of the truck behind you. I am in the rain on the window. Keep driving, Liv. It makes the waiting sweeter. I threw the phone out the window. It shattered on the wet asphalt. For 3 hours, I watched the highway blur past, the city lights fading into empty fields. At a rest stop in the dead of night, I used a payphone to call Maya. My voice was raw. I'm coming to you. Don't let me sleep. Don't let me close my eyes. She met me at the bus station at dawn, her face pale with worry. Her apartment was clean, modern, safe. No landlines, no closets with hidden spaces, just white walls and soft light. I slept on her couch for 2 days straight, the TV blaring, lights on full. I didn't dream. I didn't hear ringing. On the 3rd night, Maya fell asleep on the recliner. I sat awake, wrapped in a blanket, watching the clock. 3:16 a.m. The digital alarm clock on Maya's bookshelf flickered. The numbers dissolved into static, then reformed. 3:29. From the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, a normal sound, until it stuttered, stopped, started again. But the rhythm was wrong. Click, 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 like fingernails on glass. Maya's phone, charging on the coffee table, lit up, not with a call. Her lock screen photo, the two of us at the beach last summer, rippled like water. Then it changed. It showed me asleep on this very couch. But my face was slack, mouth slightly open, and behind my shoulder, barely visible in the reflection of the dark TV screen on the wall, stood a figure, tall, thin, wearing a stained undershirt and work pants. His arms were crossed. His face was my face, but sunken, the skin the color of old dishwater. His eyes were the yellow glow from the closet. One hand rested on the back of the couch. The other held a phone to his ear. Maya's phone buzzed with a notification, a voicemail, from her own number. I didn't play it. I didn't need to. I knew what it would say. The same words that echoed in the silence of the moving bus. The same words that lived in the drip of a leaky radiator. The same words that waited in every gap between the wires, the walls, the breaths I took when I thought I was alone. I'm almost there. I packed my bag silently, left a note on Maya's pillow, walked out into the cold pre-dawn street. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it, the weight behind my shoulder, the chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather, the soft click, click, click of fingernails against the glass of every storefront window I passed. My own voice whispered in the rhythm of my footsteps, in the rasp of my breath, in the hollow space behind my ribs where loneliness used to live. You can't outrun a shadow. You can't hang up on silence. You can't unanswer the call. I am where you are. I am when you are. I am the space between the rings. And Liv, this time, when the phone rings, you'll want to answer. The city lights blurred, not from rain, from tears I couldn't stop. I walked faster, but the footsteps behind me didn't fade. They matched my pace. Exactly. Always one step behind, always waiting for the ring. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. The Night Courier. I am writing this on a burner phone I bought at a gas station in New Mexico. I have taped over the camera lenses with electrical tape. I have removed the SIM card 3 times in the last hour just to be sure. My hands are shaking so badly that autocorrect is the only reason this is legible. I don't know who will read this. I don't know if it matters. But I have to leave a record. If you live in the Midwest, specifically along the I-80 corridor, and you see an ad for a private courier night shift offering $2,000 a week for delivering medical supplies, scroll past it. Burn your computer. Throw your phone in a river. Do not call the number. I was living in my van in a Walmart parking lot in Iowa. I had lost my job at a distribution center because of restructuring, which is corporate speak for we found a robot that works cheaper than you. I was down to my last tank of gas and a bag of stale pretzels. I needed money fast. I found the flyer taped to a lamp post near the store entrance. It was simple, black text on yellow paper. Courier wanted. Nights only. High pay. Discretion required. Call Mr. Vance. I called. A man answered on the second ring. His voice was smooth, calm, like a late-night radio DJ. "Can you drive a manual transmission?" he asked. "Yes," I lied. "I could learn." "Are you comfortable with long distances in the dark?" "Yes." "Can you follow instructions without asking questions?" "For $2,000 a week? I'll drive blindfolded." He chuckled. It was a dry sound. "Meet me at the rest stop off exit 240 at midnight. Look for the black sedan." I showed up. The rest stop was deserted, bathed in flickering orange sodium lights. A black Lincoln Town car was idling near the restrooms. The windows were tinted so dark they looked painted. I knocked on the glass. It rolled down. Mr. Vance was older than he sounded. He wore a crisp suit and sunglasses, even though it was midnight. He didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead at the highway. "The job is simple," he said, handing me a heavy envelope and a set of keys. "Take the white van parked around the back. In the back of the van, there is a cooler. Do not open the cooler. Do not adjust the temperature settings. Deliver it to the address inside this envelope. You have exactly 6 hours. If you are late, do not deliver it. Just leave the van and walk away. We will find it." "What's in the cooler?" I asked. "Medical samples," he said. "Very sensitive, very expensive, and very volatile." He handed me $500 cash. "For gas and food. You get the rest upon delivery." I walked around the building. There was a white Ford Transit van. It looked normal, except the windows were painted over with white paint from the inside. I unlocked it and got in. It smelled of bleach and ozone. The cooler was in the back. It was a heavy industrial metal box bolted to the floor. It had a digital display on the lid. 30 at the craft. It hummed loudly. I opened the envelope. The address was a farmhouse in Nebraska, 400 miles away. I started driving. The first 2 hours were fine. Just me, the road, and the hum of the cooler. The hum was annoying, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. Vroom, thump. Vroom, thump. Around 2 a.m., I was in the middle of nowhere. Cornfields stretched out on both sides of the highway, endless walls of black stalks. That's when the cooler started making noise. Thump. It sounded like something heavy hit the inside of the lid. I checked the rearview mirror. The cooler was vibrating. Thump, thump. "It's just the compressor," I told myself. "Old fridge unit." Then a voice came from the back of the van. "Let me out." I slammed on the brakes. The van skidded to a halt on the shoulder. I turned around, heart pounding. "Hello?" Silence. Just the hum of the cooler. I waited a minute. Nothing. "Sleep deprivation," I muttered. "Too much coffee." I merged back onto the highway. 10 minutes later, It happened again. "It's cold in here." It was a child's voice, a little girl. I swerved, almost hitting a guardrail. I pulled over again. I grabbed the tire iron from under the seat. I crawled into the back of the van. The cooler sat there, innocent and cold. "Is someone in there?" I yelled. No answer. I put my ear against the metal lid. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Fingernails on metal. Frantic scratching. "Please, mister," the girl's voice whispered, muffled by the insulation. "I can't feel my fingers. Let me out." My stomach dropped. Medical samples, my ass. I was trafficking a kid. I was a monster. I grabbed the latch on the cooler. I had to open it. I had to save her. But then I remembered Vance's words. "Do not open the cooler." And very volatile. What if it wasn't a kid? What if it was a recording? A trick? I looked at the digital display, 30 ideograph. If there was a kid in there, she was freezing to death. I made a decision. I popped the latch. The lid hissed. As the seal broke, cold air rushed out, smelling of formaldehyde and copper. I threw the lid open. The cooler was empty. Well, not empty. There was a small glass vial in the center, sitting in a foam cutout. Inside the vial was a dark purple liquid that swirled on its own. But there was no girl, no source of the scratching. I stared at it. I touched the inside walls. Solid metal. Then the liquid in the vial stopped swirling. It pressed against the glass, forming a tiny face, a screaming face. And the voice came from the vial. "You let the cold out." The voice wasn't a little girl anymore. It was deep, demonic, vibrating in my skull. I slammed the lid shut and latched it. My hands were shaking. I climbed back into the driver's seat. "Just deliver the package," I chanted. "Just deliver the package." I drove faster, 90 km/h. But now the van wasn't alone. I looked in the side mirror. A car was following me, a black sedan, no lights. I sped up. It sped up. I took an exit onto a dirt road, trying to lose it. The sedan followed, its tires crunching on the gravel. I was miles from the drop-off. The cornfields were closing in. Suddenly the cooler started screaming. Not a voice. A high-pitched electronic shriek that pierced my eardrums. The display on the lid was flashing red. Containment breach. Temperature rising. 40 degree, 45 degree, 50 degree. The heat coming off the cooler was intense. It was heating up from the inside. "Burn!" the voice screamed from the back. "Burn it all!" The black sedan rammed the back of the van. Crash! I lost control. The van spun out, sliding into a ditch. The engine died. Silence. I sat there, dazed. My head hit the steering wheel. Blood trickled into my eye. I saw headlights approaching. The sedan stopped at the top of the ditch. Doors opened. 2 men in suits got out. They wore gas masks. They walked down the slope toward the van. I grabbed the tire iron. I wasn't going down without a fight. But they didn't come for me. They went to the back doors. They ripped them open. One of them pulled a device out, a flamethrower. "Wait!" I screamed. "I'm in here!" They ignored me. The man with the flamethrower aimed it at the cooler. Whoosh! A jet of fire engulfed the back of the van. I scrambled out the driver's side door, crawling into the cornfield. The heat was searing. The van exploded. Boom! I covered my head as metal debris rained down. I peeked through the corn stalks. The cooler was glowing red-hot in the wreckage. But it wasn't melting. It was opening. The lid flew off, and something rose out of the fire. It wasn't a liquid anymore. It was a cloud, A purple, swirling cloud of smoke that took the shape of a man, a giant, towering man made of shadow and gas. The men in suits didn't run. They stood there, calm. One of them pulled out a specialized vacuum device, like a Ghostbusters pack. They turned it on. A vortex of suction pulled at the smoke creature. The creature roared. It was a sound that broke the windows of the sedan. I am eternal! The vacuum sucked it in. Slowly, inch by inch, the purple smoke was dragged into the containment unit. Once it was gone, the men clamped the unit shut. They looked at the burning van. "Driver's gone," one said. His voice was muffled by the mask. "Doesn't matter," the other said. "He was contamination. The breach is contained." They walked back to their car and drove away. I waited in the cornfield for an hour. I waited until the fire died down. Then I walked. I walked for 10 miles to the nearest town. I bought this phone. I rented a motel room. I thought it was over. I thought I was just a witness to some secret government cleanup. But this morning I woke up. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. I looked in the mirror. My eyes. My irises aren't brown anymore. They are purple, swirling dark purple. And when I speak, there is an echo. A second voice underneath mine, a little girl's voice. "We are safe now," it whispers when I talk. "We are warm." I didn't just open the cooler, I breathed it in. When the seal broke, when the air rushed out, I inhaled it. I am the container now, and I can feel it changing me. My skin is getting hard, cold, my blood feels thick, and I have an urge, a terrible, overwhelming urge. I want to go to the city. I want to go to a crowded place, a mall, a stadium, and I want to scream. I want to open my mouth and let it all out. I am fighting it. I am driving into the desert. I am going where there are no people. But the voice is getting louder. "Share us," it says. "Share the gift. If you see me, if you see a man with purple eyes driving the stolen car, run. Don't let me speak. Because I think if I scream, the world ends." That concludes this story. A new one begins now. The radio in my car plays stations that don't exist anywhere. I bought the 9x8 Buick Park Avenue because it was the only thing my frayed credit could handle after the layoff. Rain sheeted down the windshield as I signed the papers in Mr. Henderson's cluttered office above his used car lot. The scent of mildew and stale coffee hung thick in the air. He avoided my eyes while sliding the keys across the desk, his knuckles swollen with arthritis. "Run smooth," he mumbled, tapping the odometer with a yellowed fingernail. "Needs new tires, but the radio's the real issue. Acts up after midnight. Sold as is." He wouldn't say more, just took my crumpled bills and vanished into a back room that smelled faintly of wet dog and motor oil. I didn't care about the radio. I needed wheels. The Buick's vinyl seats were cracked. The odometer read 108 FL, 342 miles, and the glove compartment latch was held together with duct tape. But it started on the first try, the engine a deep, reassuring purr that vibrated through the steering wheel. I drove home, through the downpour, heater blasting, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in months. The first skip happened that same night. I was driving back from a late shift at the diner, exhaustion making my eyelids heavy. The digital clock on the dash glowed 1:47 a.m. I flicked on the radio to stay awake, twisting the dial past static-filled country stations and tinny pop hits. Then, between 98.7 and 99.1, the static cleared. Not music, a voice, calm, female, Midwestern accent. warm as honey. And the lilacs are blooming early this year, Martha, heavy with rain, smells like forgiveness on the wind. It crackled slightly like an old recording, but the words were crystal clear. I slowed the car, squinting at this dial. No station number showed on the display, just static lines. I pressed the seek button. The voice vanished, replaced by a garbled news report about a missing hiker. I shook my head. Stress. Sleep deprivation. I turned the radio off. It happened again, 3 nights later. 11:59 p.m. I was driving past the abandoned textile mill on the edge of town, the skeletal remains of smokestacks silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The radio was off. I hadn't touched it. Yet music swelled from the speakers, a slow, haunting piano melody I'd never heard before, melancholic and familiar all at once. The digital display flickered. 3:17 a.m. I checked my phone. 12:02 a.m. The piano played on, notes resonating deep in my chest. Then a man's voice, rough but gentle, whispered over the keys. "She's waiting by the river bend, Daniel, where the willows weep. She remembers the locket. She remembers the lie." My hands tightened on the wheel. "My name is Daniel. I've never owned a locket. I killed the ignition at a red light." The piano died mid-note. The display reset to 12:03 a.m. When I restarted the car, the radio stayed silent. But the scent of wet earth and river water clung to the air inside the Buick, thick and cloying. I stopped using the radio. I drove in silence, windows down even in the cold, filling the cabin with the roar of wind and tires on wet asphalt. But the car remembered. One Tuesday, stuck in gridlock near the old courthouse, the static returned, not loud, a low hum beneath the traffic noise. Then my mother's voice. Not a recording. Her voice, the exact lilt she used when humming while cooking Sunday gravy, the slight rasp from years of smoking. It sang a lullaby she'd made up for me when I was 5. "Hush now, Danny boy, the waves are crashing slow. Mama's right here where the cold winds blow." Tears blurred my vision. She'd been gone 7 years. Buried beside my father in a cemetery 3 states away. I slammed my fist on the dashboard. The static swallowed the song. The display blinked. 3:17 a.m. For 3 seconds before going dark, the scent of her gardenias filled the car. Sweet, heady, impossible. Panic sent me to the auto shop. Sal's garage smelled of grease and gasoline. Sal himself, a bear of a man with tattooed forearms, listened patiently while I jabbered about phantom voices and impossible clocks. He checked the wiring, the alternator, the antenna. "Battery's weak," he grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can cause weird electrical gremlins. And this old AM/FM unit, probably full of ghosts. I'll replace the head unit, $350. I didn't have $350. I paid for a new battery and left. That night, driving home under a bruised purple twilight, the new battery terminals gleamed under the hoodlight. I started the engine. The radio stayed off. Relief washed over me. Then, as I turned onto my street, the display flickered. Not numbers. Words scrolling slowly. "We see you, Daniel." The voice that followed wasn't static. It was layered, a chorus of whispers, some childlike, some ancient, all overlapping. "The tires are worn. The left rear tread is thin. The light on Elm Street is out. She's crying again. The pills are in the blue jar. The locket is under the floorboard." I swerved onto my lawn, gravel crunching under the tires. I ripped the radio's faceplate off with my bare hands, wires snapping like tendons. Sparks flew. The display died. I sat in the sudden, ringing silence, shaking, the smell of burnt plastic sharp in my nose. On the passenger seat, where no one had been, lay a single, rain-slick gardenia petal. I covered the car, literally. After work, I draped thick, moving blankets over the entire Buick, windows, roof, headlights, securing them with bungee cords. I parked it deep in my overgrown backyard, under the skeletal branches of the old oak tree. I walked to work, took the bus, avoided the backyard. For 3 days, silence. Then, on the fourth night, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the house. I lay awake, listening to the rain lash the windows. At 3:17 a.m., a sound cut through the downpour. Faint, insistent. Thump, thump, thump. Not thunder, not hail, rhythm. I crept to the back window, peeling back the curtain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the backyard. The moving blankets were gone. The Buick sat exposed, gleaming wet under the storm. And the headlights were on, not the weak, yellowed beams of my headlights. These were blinding white, cutting sharp cones through the rain. The car wasn't running, no engine noise, but the headlights pulsed with the thump, 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 like a heartbeat. And from inside the sealed, blanket-free cabin, the radio played, loud, clear. A children's choir singing in a language I didn't know, their voices high and pure, layered over a deep, resonant drumbeat that vibrated the window pane beneath my fingers. The digital display glowed brightly through the rain-streaked windshield. 3:17 a.m. Under it, scrolling slowly. "Come home, Daniel." I didn't go out. I locked the back door, wedged a chair under the knob, sat at the kitchen table until dawn, a flashlight beam cutting the dark, jumping at every creak of the old house. When the sun rose, weak and gray, I went outside. The Buick sat silently under the dripping oak tree, no blankets, no pulsing lights. The radio was dark, but the driver's side window was fogged from the inside, and written in the condensation, finger-drawn in neat, looping script, were the words, "The truth is under the floorboard, like the locket." My throat closed. There was no floorboard in this house. I'd never owned a locket. But the words echoed a radio's whispers. I scrubbed the window with my sleeve until my arm ached. The words vanished, but the scent of gardenias lingered in the damp air. I called in sick to the diner, drove the bus to the public library, spent hours hunched over microfiche readers, the whirring machine casting green shadows on my face. I searched local newspapers from the 1940s and 50s. The Buick's VIN plate, partially rusted, had hinted at a 48 model year. I found it on page 3 of the Havenport Chronicle, October 17th, 1948. Local boy drowns in Mill River. The grainy photo showed a smiling teenager, Daniel Riley, holding a fishing rod. He looked like a younger, happier version of my father. The article mentioned his younger brother, Thomas, who'd witnessed it, how Thomas had tried to save him, how he'd carried guilt like a stone, how he'd moved away after the funeral. I traced the name Thomas Riley through census records. He'd settled here, changed his name to Henderson, opened a used car lot. My blood turned to ice. Mr. Henderson, the seller. My hands trembled as I copied the address of the old Riley house, a cottage long demolished, replaced by a strip mall. But the article mentioned Daniel's prized possession, a silver locket, given to him by his sweetheart, Martha. He'd been wearing it the day he drowned. It was never recovered. That night, I drove the bus home, my skin crawling. The strip mall parking lot was empty, under flickering sodium lights. I parked near the spot where the cottage would have stood. Rain had started again, a cold drizzle. I sat in the bus shelter, watching the empty lot. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the street lights dimmed, not went out. Dimmed, like breath held. The air grew thick, smelling of river mud and wet stone. From the darkness near the old foundation stones, a figure emerged, a boy of about 14, wearing worn overalls and a striped shirt soaked through. Water streamed from his hair. He didn't look at me. He stared at the pavement where the cottage's kitchen would have been, and he hummed that same piano melody from the radio, slow, sad, haunting. He reached down, fingers brushing the wet asphalt. When he straightened, he held something small and silver, a locket. He opened it. Even from 20 feet away, I saw the tiny photo inside, a young woman with kind eyes, Martha. He closed the locket, pressed it to his chest, and looked directly at me. His eyes weren't empty. They were full of a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. He raised his hand, not in greeting, in warning. Then he turned and walked toward the alley, fading into the rain like smoke. The streetlights snapped back to full brightness. The scent of river water vanished. I ran back to the bus stop, my breath ragged, my clothes soaked. My phone was dead. I walked home. The whole way I heard the piano melody in my head, and beneath it the whisper, the floorboard, the truth. I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, curtains drawn, a baseball bat across my knees. The house was silent, too silent, no creaking pipes, no distant traffic, just the hum of the refrigerator. At 3:16 a.m. the lights flickered, once, twice. On the third flicker, they died. Not a power outage. The street light still glowed outside the window, only my house was dark. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. In the sudden, thick silence, the Buick's horn blared from the backyard. Not a honk. A long, sustained brop that echoed off the houses. Then the sound of the car door opening, slamming shut. Footsteps on the gravel path, slow, deliberate, crisp, in the unnatural quiet. They stopped at my back door. The knob turned. The chair I'd wedged under it scraped across the floor. The door opened. Rain blew in, carrying the scent of gardenias and river mud. I stood in the pitch black, bat raised, heart hammering against my ribs. No footsteps inside, just the rain. Then the voice, not from the doorway, from right behind my ear. My mother's voice, soft with tears. Daniel, he didn't jump. He was pushed by the man in the gray coat, the one who took the locket. I whirled, swinging the bat blindly. It connected with nothing but air. The light surged back on, blinding me. The back door stood open, rain sheeting in. The chair lay overturned. No one was there. But on the kitchen table, where nothing had been before, sat a small tarnished silver locket. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was cold, wet. I pried it open. Inside wasn't a photo, a tiny water-stained slip of paper. Handwriting I recognized from the library microfiche. Thomas Riley's shaky script. Forgive me, Danny. He made me do it. Henderson took the locket, took everything. He's still here, in the wires, in the static. He feeds on the lost. Henderson, Mr. Henderson, not Thomas Riley's brother. Himself, the man who'd sold me the car, the man who'd drowned Daniel Riley for that locket. 80 years of guilt, and he'd never left. He'd woven himself into the town's grief, into the static between stations, into the very metal and wires of that Buick, and he'd been waiting for a Daniel to come home. The car horn blared again. Closer this time, not from the backyard, from the street. I ran to the front window. The Buick sat parked at the curb, engine running, headlights blazing. The driver's door opened. No one got out, but the passenger door swung wide, inviting. The radio played softly through the open window, a slow, mournful fiddle tune. The digital display glowed. 3:17 a.m. Scrolling underneath. The floorboard is waiting. Let me show you. I knew what floorboard it meant. Not in my house, in the old cottage, under the kitchen sink where Daniel Riley had hidden his journal. The journal that proved Henderson's murder. The journal Henderson had spent decades trying to erase. He hadn't just taken the locket. He'd taken Daniel's voice, his story, and now he wanted mine, to drown it in static, to make it part of his endless, hungry signal. I walked out the front door. Rain soaked through my shirt instantly. I didn't care. The fiddle music swelled, warm and sad, wrapping around me like a shroud. I stopped the curb, a few feet from the open passenger door. The scent of gardenias was overpowering. "Why me?" I whispered into the rain. The static crackled from the speakers. Henderson's voice, layered with 100 others, filled the street. "You carry his name, his sorrow, his unfinished song. The static hungers for echoes, Daniel. It feeds on the gaps between heartbeats, between lifetimes, between truth and silence. Let me take the weight. Let me be the voice on the wire. You can rest." I looked at a locket in my palm, cold, heavy. Daniel Riley's truth, my truth. The rain washed over my face, mixing with tears I hadn't known I was crying. For Daniel, for Thomas, trapped all these years, for myself, for the loneliness that had hollowed me out since the layoff, since Sarah left, since my mother's funeral, where I hadn't been able to say goodbye. The static promised an end to the ache, a warm, humming silence. I took a step toward the car, then another. The passenger seat gleamed, dry and inviting, under the dome light. The fiddle played on. The display blinked. Almost home. I stopped. 1 foot on the curb, 1 in the gutter. Rainwater swirled around my ankle. I thought of Daniel Riley's face in that grainy photo, his smile, the locket warm against his chest on a sunny riverbank. I thought of Thomas Riley, aged and broken, selling haunted cars to men named Daniel, trying to buy forgiveness he could never earn. I thought of my mother's voice singing in the dark. The static wasn't peace. It was hunger. I closed my hand around the locket. The metal bit into my palm. I turned away from the car, from the warm light, from the promise of silence. I walked back up my driveway, the rain washing the gardenia scent from my skin. The Buick's engine died abruptly. The headlights cut out. The fiddle music vanished, replaced by a shriek of static that tore through the night, a sound of pure, frustrated rage. Then silence, only the rain. I locked the front door, drew the curtains, sat at the kitchen table with the locket and Thomas Riley's note. I called the Historical Society. I called the police. I called a lawyer. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I dug up the floorboard under my own kitchen sink, a loose tile I'd never noticed. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was Daniel Riley's waterlogged journal. His final entry, dated October 16th, 1948. "Henderson wants the locket. Says it's worth more than my life. Laughed when I said I'd tell Mama. Told me the river keeps secrets. I'm scared. But Martha's picture is in it. I won't let him have it." The Buick was gone when I looked outside. No tire tracks, no gravel disturbed, just wet pavement and the rising sun. I donated the journal and locket to the town museum. Mr. Henderson's lot was shut down. They found ledgers full of names, people who'd bought cars from him, people who'd later vanished or changed or lost their minds. People like me. I take the bus to work now. I keep a small radio on my nightstand. Sometimes, late at night, I turn it on. Just static, but on clear. Cold nights, when the moon is full and the wind is still, the static clears for a few seconds. Not voices, not music, just the sound of water, gentle, flowing, and beneath it, so faint I might imagine it, a boy's laughter on the river. I leave the radio on all night. Let the static hum. It's not Henderson's signal anymore. It's Daniel's. It's Thomas's. It's the sound of truth, finally finding its frequency. I sleep with the window open. Let the real wind carry the sound of the living world, the distant highway, the neighbor's dog, the rustle of leaves. The static on the radio is just background noise now, a reminder, not a hunger, a lullaby. At 3:17 a.m., it always fades, not because the signal dies, but because the dawn is coming and some silences are worth keeping. I close my eyes, listen to the rain on the roof, and for the first time in years, I don't dream of drowning. I dream of lilacs, heavy with rain, smelling like forgiveness on the wind. That's the end of this story. Now we move on. The static on Channel 7 shows a version of my life where I never woke up. I should have known something was wrong when the landlord didn't ask for a deposit. The listing had appeared on a fringe rental site I only used out of desperation. A single room in a converted Victorian on the edge of town. $300 a month, utilities included. No photos beyond a grainy shot of a peeling front porch. When I called the number, a man with a voice like gravel answered on the first ring and said the place had been empty for years. He didn't ask for references, didn't run a credit check, didn't even want to meet me in person. He texted an address and a 4-digit code for the lockbox containing the key. Cash only, left in an envelope taped beneath the kitchen sink on the first of each month. I was broke, between jobs, and sleeping on a friend's couch. I took it without hesitation. The house stood at the end of Hemlock Lane, a cul-de-sac that dead-ended into a dense thicket of pine trees. It was the only structure on the street that hadn't been renovated into something sleek and modern. 3 stories of weathered gray clapboard, a sagging roof line, and a wraparound porch choked with dead ivy. The windows were dark, some cracked, others boarded. My room was on the 2nd floor facing the woods. The landlord, whose name I never learned, had left a single bare bulb burning in the hallway when I arrived. The air inside smelled of dust, damp plaster, and something faintly sweet, like rotten apples. The room itself was larger than I expected, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. A rust-stained sink stood in one corner, and a narrow bed with a lumpy mattress occupied the center. But what caught my attention immediately was the television. It sat on a heavy wooden cabinet against the far wall, an old console model from the late 70s or early 80s, all dark wood veneer and fabric speaker grills. I hadn't seen anything like it outside of antique shops. The screen was small by modern standards, curved glass thick with dust. I assumed it was a relic the previous tenant had left behind, non-functional, part of the room's unsettling charm. I didn't own a TV anyway. My phone was my entertainment. For the first 3 nights, nothing unusual happened beyond the expected creaks and groans of an old house settling. I'd lie in bed, listening to the wind stir the pines outside my window, the occasional scuttle of what I hoped were squirrels in the walls. Sleep came fitfully. I kept waking at exactly 3:17 a.m., my heart hammering for no reason I could identify. The digital clock on my phone would glow that precise time, and I'd lie there in the dark until my breathing slowed and I could drift off again. By the 4th night, exhaustion had worn me down. I fell asleep almost immediately after my head hit the pillow. I woke to the sound of static, not the gentle hiss of empty airwaves, but a violent, tearing noise that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark, except for a flickering blue-white glow emanating from the corner. The television was on. I sat up, my pulse quickening. I hadn't touched it. I'd barely looked at it beyond that first day. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 2:48 a.m. The static roared from the speaker, a chaotic waterfall of white noise that filled the small room. I swung my legs out of bed and approached the set cautiously. The screen showed nothing but rolling gray snow, the kind of visual chaos that hypnotizes if you stare too long. I reached for the power button on the front of the cabinet. My finger hovered an inch from the plastic knob when the static changed. It didn't resolve into a clear image all at once. It fractured first, patches of darkness swimming through the noise, then coalescing into shapes. A ceiling, a water stain in the shape of a continent I didn't recognize. The camera, or whatever was capturing this, was stationary, pointed upward at a bedroom ceiling I knew intimately. It was my ceiling. The crack running diagonally from the light fixture to the corner near the window, the faint shadow cast by the curtain rod. But the angle was wrong. It was as if the viewpoint was lying flat on its back, staring upward from the center of the room. Then I saw my own hand. It lay limp at the edge of the frame, pale and motionless against rumpled sheets. The cheap silver ring I wore on my right index finger caught a sliver of ambient light. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at my own hand, still raised toward the television's power button. The hand on screen didn't move. Neither did I. The static hissed, and the image sharpened further. I could see the entire bed now, and I was in it. The version of me on screen lay perfectly still beneath the same thin blanket I'd pulled over myself hours earlier, eyes closed, chest neither rising nor falling in any visible rhythm. The scene was utterly silent beyond the ever-present static. The audio wasn't of the room itself, but remained that electronic roar, as if the transmission existed outside normal sound. I watched my own sleeping face for a full minute, waiting for the subtle shift of breath, the twitch of a dreaming eye. Nothing. Absolute stillness. A stillness that felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. Sleep isn't like that. Even in deep rest, the body betrays life. A flutter of eyelids, a shift of position, the soft sigh of exhalation. This was different. This was the stillness of an object, of a photograph. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a floorboard. Pain shot up my leg, grounding me in my own body, my own reality. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the familiar contours of my belongings. The backpack slumped by the door, the jacket draped over the chair, the half-empty water glass on the nightstand, real, tangible, mine. I shone the light directly at the television screen. The image remained. My sleeping double lay undisturbed in that impossible silence. The static continued its electronic scream. I jabbed the power button on the console. The screen didn't go black. The image of my sleeping body persisted, now illuminated by the harsh white circle of my phone's flashlight reflecting off the glass. I pressed the button again, harder, mashing it repeatedly. Nothing. I ran my hands along the sides of the cabinet, searching for a main power switch, a cord to yank from the wall. My fingers found only smooth wood and dust. There was no visible power cord, no cable input, no antenna terminals on the back that I could see from the front. It was as if the television drew its power from the air itself, from the silence of the house, from something older than wiring. Panic began to coil in my stomach. I grabbed the heavy wooden cabinet and shoved. It didn't budge. It felt anchored to the floor, impossibly heavy. I struck the screen with the heel of my hand, a dull thud against the thick glass. The image didn't distort. My sleeping face remained placid, undisturbed. I was about to hurl my phone at it when the static changed pitch. It dropped in frequency, becoming a deeper, more resonant hum, and within that hum, a new sound emerged. Faint at first, then gradually clarifying. The sound of breathing. But it wasn't normal breathing. It was slow, shallow, labored, the wet, rattling inhalations of someone struggling to pull air through congested lungs. Each breath took a full 5 seconds to complete, followed by a 3-second pause before the next desperate pull. It was the breathing of the dying, and it was coming from the television speaker, layered beneath the static, synchronized perfectly with the motionless body on screen. Except the body wasn't moving. There was no rise and fall of the chest. Visible. The breathing existed as sound only, a ghost in the machine. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor, knees drawn to my chest. I kept my eyes locked on the screen. Minutes bled together. 3:02 a.m., 3:11 a.m. The breathing continued its awful rhythm. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., it stopped. The static hissed on, but the wet, rattling breaths ceased. The image on screen remained unchanged, my body lying still beneath the blanket. But the absence of that sound was somehow more terrifying than its presence. A finality settled over the scene. I knew, with a certainty that bypassed rational thought, that the version of me on that screen had just died, or perhaps had been dead all along, and the breathing had been a cruel illusion, a playback of final moments. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling against the wall, watching my own corpse. The sky outside began to lighten from black to deep indigo. At 4:03 a.m., the static abruptly cut off. The screen went black for exactly 3 seconds. Then it resolved into a new image, my room, but empty. The bed was neatly made, the blanket smoothed tight across the mattress. My backpack was gone from beside the door. The jacket no longer hung on the chair. The water glass had vanished from the nightstand. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Real dust motes, not the digital artifacts of a broadcast. This was a live feed. I was watching my own room as it would appear hours from now after I had left, but I hadn't left. I was still here, crouched on the floor in yesterday's clothes, my phone battery down to 16%. The camera angle was identical to the previous shot, stationary, centered on the bed. I watched the empty room for 10 minutes. Nothing moved, no shadows shifted unnaturally, no figures materialized in the corner. It was just an empty room in the morning light. Profoundly ordinary, profoundly wrong. At 4:17 a.m., the front door of the house creaked open downstairs. Heavy footsteps crossed the foyer, ascended the stairs. My heart seized. Someone was coming. The landlord? A squatter? The footsteps stopped outside my door. The knob turned. I scrambled to my feet, ready to confront whoever was entering. The door swung inward. No one stood there. The hallway beyond was empty, lit by the weak dawn filtering through a grimy window at the far end. The door had opened by itself, or rather, it had been opened by someone who was no longer there. I stepped cautiously into the hallway, peering left and right. Nothing. I descended the stairs, my bare feet silent on the worn wood. The front door stood slightly ajar, a wedge of pale morning light cutting across the dusty floorboards. I pushed it shut and locked it, my hands shaking. When I returned to my room, the television was off. The screen was dark glass reflecting my own pale, terrified face. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, jumping at every sound, unable to focus on the freelance editing work I'd brought with me. I avoided looking at the television. At 7 p.m., exhausted and hollow-eyed, I decided I would leave. This was insane. I would pack my bag, walk to the bus stop at the end of Hemlock Lane, and never look back. I didn't care about losing the deposit I'd never paid. I would sleep on another friend's couch. Anything was better than this. As I zipped my backpack, my eyes drifted to the television. It was still off, but something about its presence in the room felt expectant, like a predator waiting for its prey to relax its guard. I decided to try one more time to disable it. I knelt beside the cabinet and finally found what I'd missed before, a small access panel on the bottom rear of the unit, nearly hidden by the baseboard. My fingers, trembling, pried it loose. Inside wasn't a tangle of wires and circuit boards. There were no components at all. The space behind the panel was empty, except for a single object resting on the bare wood floor of the cabinet, a photograph. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a black and white print, slightly curled at the edges, showing a young man lying in a bed identical to mine. His eyes were closed. His hands were folded neatly over his chest. He looked peaceful. He looked dead. And he was me. Not a resemblance, not a look-alike. It was my face, my exact features, though perhaps a year or two younger. The photograph had been taken in this very room. I recognized the water stain on the ceiling visible above his head. On the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, were 3 words: Channel 7 only. A coldness spread through my limbs. I looked from the photograph to the dark television screen. Without thinking, without wanting to, I reached forward and pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life instantly. No static this time, no gradual resolution. It simply displayed an image, crisp and clear. I was lying in bed, eyes closed, breathing slowly. It was me from last night, before I'd woken to the static. The camera angle was identical to what I'd seen hours earlier, a view from the foot of the bed, as if someone stood watching me sleep. I watched myself sleep for nearly an hour, the real me standing rigid before the screen, the televised me lost in dreams I couldn't remember. At 1:44 a.m., the sleeping version of me on screen stirred, turned onto my side, faced the camera directly. and opened my eyes. But they weren't my eyes, not as I knew them. The pupils were dilated wide, swallowing the irises in pools of black. The whites were threaded with ruptured capillaries, a faint web of crimson against the yellowed sclera. The face was mine, but the expression was alien, a placid, knowing emptiness that held no recognition of the world it observed. Those black-eyed eyes stared directly into the camera lens, stared directly at me. Then the mouth moved. Not in speech. The audio remained silent beyond a low, almost subaudible hum, but in deliberate, slow motion, forming words. I read the lips with dawning horror. You never woke up? The image flickered. For a single frame, the screen showed the room empty, the bed neatly made. Then it snapped back to the black-eyed version of me staring from the bed. The lips moved again. This is where you stayed. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to smash the screen, to tear the cabinet apart with my bare hands, but my body refused to move toward it. A profound inertia held me in place, a magnetic repulsion mixed with a terrible, compulsive fascination. I was watching a recording of my own death, or worse, not a death, but a failure to return, a version of me that had slipped beneath the surface of sleep and never broken back through to consciousness, a soul that had drowned in dreams. The black-eyed me on screen began to sit up, slowly, joints moving with a stiffness that suggested disuse. The blanket fell away. The figure swung its legs over the side of the bed, feet touching the floor. It stood, and it began to walk toward the camera, toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure advanced until its face filled the screen, those bottomless black eyes staring out at me, the lips parting slightly. The hum from the speaker deepened, vibrating in my bones. The face leaned closer, closer, until the screen was filled with one enormous dilated pupil. Then darkness. The television went black. The room was silent except for my own ragged breathing. I stood there for a full minute, waiting for it to reactivate, for the horror to resume. Nothing happened. Cautiously, I approached the set again. The screen remained dark. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again. Still nothing. For the first time since I'd arrived, the television appeared to be truly, completely off. Relief washed over me so powerfully, my knees nearly buckled. It was over. Whatever curse, whatever anomaly this place harbored, I had witnessed its worst and survived. I would leave at first light. I packed my bag with frantic efficiency, every sense straining for the slightest sound from the television. None came. I lay down on the bed fully clothed, my backpack beside me, ready to flee the moment dawn broke. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion won. I drifted off sometime after 5 a.m. I woke to the sound of static. My eyes flew open. The room was dark. The television glowed in the corner, alive with rolling gray snow. 3:17 a.m. The numbers on my phone burned in the darkness. I hadn't set an alarm. I hadn't even charged my phone before bed. I'd been too terrified to turn my back on the dark screen for the few seconds it would take to plug it in. Yet here I was, awake at that exact cursed time again. The static coalesced faster this time. Within seconds, the image resolved. I was lying in bed, but not the bed in this room. This was a hospital bed. White sheets, a metal rail along the side. An IV stand stood beside me, a bag of clear fluid dripping slowly into a tube taped to the back of my hand. My face was pale, waxy. Tubes ran from my nose. A heart monitor beeped steadily just beyond the edge of the frame. Beep, beep, beep. A slow, steady rhythm that spoke of a body clinging to function by the thinnest of threads. This wasn't a room I recognized, but the face on the pillow was undeniably mine. The camera angle shifted slightly, not a pan or zoom, but a subtle change in perspective, as if the viewpoint had moved 6 inches to the left. Now I could see the heart monitor display. The green line jumped with each beep, and beneath it, a digital readout of vital signs, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, and a date, October 14th, 2023. My blood ran cold. That was 3 days from now. The static hissed. The image sharpened further. A figure moved into frame at the edge of the bed. An older woman with graying hair pulled into a loose bun. She wore a faded floral dress. She reached out and gently smoothed the hair from the forehead of the comatose me on the bed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to my temple. When she straightened up, she turned slightly toward the camera, toward me, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. It was my mother, but older, frailer. The mother I remembered from my childhood, not the vibrant woman who'd visited me just last month, full of energy and plans for retirement. This woman looked decades older, worn down by grief and sleepless nights. She whispered something to the comatose me on the bed. The audio remained silent, except for the static and the steady beep of the monitor, but I read her lips with perfect, horrifying clarity. "Come back to us, sweetheart. Please just come back." The image flickered. The hospital room dissolved into static for a heartbeat, then reformed into a different scene. The same hospital room, but darker. Nighttime. The heart monitor beeped faster now, erratically. The line on the display jumped and spiked. A nurse rushed into frame, her face tight with urgency. She pressed a button on the wall, a code blue alarm that remained silent in our world. More medical personnel flooded the room. They worked on my body with practiced efficiency. Chest compressions, defibrillator paddles, injections. My mother stood in the corner, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The heart monitor flatlined. A single, endless tone replaced the beeping. The medical team stepped back, their shoulders slumping in unison. One of the doctors turned to my mother and shook his head slowly. She collapsed into a chair, her body racked with silent sobs. The screen went black. For 3 full seconds, nothing. Then the static returned, softer now, almost gentle. The image that emerged was my room again, but not as it was tonight, not as it had been last night. This was my room as it existed right now, in this very moment. The backpack still packed by the bed, the door slightly ajar where I'd left it after my frantic preparations to flee, and me, my real, living, breathing self, standing frozen before the television, my face a mask of terror, my eyes wide with the reflection of the screen's glow. The camera panned slowly across the room, taking in every detail with impossible precision. It lingered on my face for a long moment. Then the lips of the televised me began to move. Not the black-eyed doppelganger from before. This was me, my exact expression, my exact features. But the words forming on those lips were not my own. "You think you're the one who woke up," the lips said silently. "You think you escaped. But you didn't wake up. You never woke up. This is the dream. This room, this house, this fear, It's all happening inside the mind of the boy in the hospital bed. The real world is the one with the heart monitor. The real world is the one where your mother weeps. This is just the place your consciousness fled to when your body failed. Channel 7 isn't showing you an alternate reality. It's showing you the truth you can't face. The image flickered again. Hospital room, flatline. My mother's grief. Flicker. My room. Me staring at the screen. Flicker. Hospital room. A doctor pulling a white sheet over my face. Flicker. My room. The television screen now showing only static, but within that static, a faint, ghostly image of my own face, mouth open in a silent scream. I fell to my knees. The weight of it crushed me. Not just the horror of what I was seeing, but the terrible, seductive plausibility of it. How many times had I woken at 3:17 a.m.? How many times had this house felt less like a physical place and more like a stage set, its details slightly off, its atmosphere thick with unreality? How many times had I questioned whether my memories of the days before moving here were entirely my own? The static softened further, becoming almost melodic. The image on screen shifted one final time. No hospital, no room, just darkness. And within that darkness, 2 points of light like distant stars. They resolved into eyes, my eyes, but calm now, at peace. The lips beneath them formed a single word, stay. And in that moment, I understood the choice being offered. To fight, to tear myself away from this screen, to run from this house, to return to a world that might not even exist beyond this dream, or to accept, to let go, to sink back into the silence of the hospital bed, to release the frantic, terrified consciousness that had been clinging to this fabricated reality, to stop struggling, to stop waking up. My body felt heavy. My eyelids drooped. The static became a lullaby. The glow of the screen washed over me like warm water. I thought of my mother's face, aged by grief I had caused. I thought of the peaceful expression on the face in the photograph. I thought of how tired I was. How very, very tired. I took a step toward the television, then another. My reflection in the dark glass between transmissions showed a man walking willingly into his own grave. I reached out my hand, not to turn it off, not to destroy it, but to touch the screen, to step through. The static bloomed into brilliant white light. The hum deepened into a single, resonant tone that filled my skull. I felt myself dissolving not into nothingness, but into silence, into stillness, into the deep, dreamless sleep I had been running from since the moment my heart first faltered on that hospital monitor 3 days from now. The last thing I saw before the light consumed me was my own face on the screen, eyes closed, breathing slow and even, finally at rest, finally home. And in a hospital room 3 days in my future, surrounded by the soft beep of machines and the scent of antiseptic, the boy in the bed took one last, shallow breath. His chest stilled. The monitor emitted a single, sustained tone. And somewhere in a house at the end of a forgotten lane, a television screen went dark for the final time. This story has come to an end. Let's start the next. Every clock in my house stops at the same time every night. I signed the lease for the house on Hemlock Lane because it was the only place that would take me after the eviction. The realtor, a man named Finch, with nicotine-stained fingers and breath that smelled of stale coffee, handed me the keys with a tight smile. "It's got character," he'd said, avoiding my eyes as he gestured at the sagging porch and peeling paint. And the price? Well, let's just say the previous owner left in a hurry. He didn't mention why. I didn't ask. The rent was $500 a month for a whole house, a 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and a turret room overlooking the overgrown backyard. Too good to be true, but desperation makes you overlook cracks in the foundation. Moving in was chaos. Boxes piled high in the dusty foyer, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old wood. The first thing I noticed was the clocks. Not just one or two, dozens of them. Grandfather clocks in the hallways, mantel clocks in the living room, tiny porcelain ones on shelves, even a rusted weather-vane clock on the turret roof. All silent, all stopped. Finch had shrugged when I asked. Collector's item. Previous owner was obsessed. Just unplug 'em or take out the batteries. They're not worth anything. I did. I yanked cords from outlets, pried open battery compartments, tossed dead AA cells into the trash. The house fell into a deep, watchful silence. That first night, I slept in the living room on a bare mattress, too exhausted to unpack. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Ticking. Not one clock. All of them. A soft, rhythmic chorus rising from every room. Tick-tock, 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 like 100 heartbeats sinking in the dark. I sat up, shivering despite the summer heat. The grandfather clock in the hall glowed faintly in the moonlight, its pendulum swinging smoothly. The mantel clock's brass hands gleamed. Even the weather-vane clock on the roof cast a shadow through the turret window. Every clock in the house had started on its own, and every single one read 3:17 a.m. I told myself it was a power surge, a fluke. I reset them all the next morning, pulling batteries, unplugging cords, winding down springs until my fingers ached. By noon, the house was silent again. That night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the ticking began anew. Louder this time, insistent. I lay rigid in bed, listening to the symphony of timepieces counting down to nothing. When dawn came, every clock had stopped again. Frozen at 3:17. I called Finch. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left 3 messages. He never returned. The third night, I stayed awake. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, I sat in the armchair, facing the hallway grandfather clock. 3:16 a.m., the house held its breath. At 3:17, the ticking erupted, not just from the clocks, but from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very air. The grandfather clock's glass face, frosted over. Ice spread across the mantel, snaking toward the other clocks. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight, and in that frozen light I saw them, handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the frost on the window panes. Small hands, child-sized, all facing inward as if pressing against the glass from the outside. I didn't sleep again that week. I covered every clock with sheets, taped their faces shut, buried batteries in the backyard. Nothing worked. At 3:17 a.m., the ticking would shake the house, the frost would bloom, and the handprints would appear. One morning, I found a single, muddy child's footprint on the kitchen floor beneath the window. The print was fresh, small, wearing a boot with a star-shaped tread. I'd never owned such boots. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who lived next door in a neatly kept bungalow, found me scrubbing the footprint away at dawn. She watched silently for a moment, her gardening gloves tucked under her arm, before speaking. "They're looking for him," she said softly. Her voice was dry as dead leaves. The clocks stop for him. They always have. Who? I whispered, my hand still wet with soapy water. Thomas. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The boy who lived here, 1923, he vanished one October night. They searched the woods for weeks, never found him. But the clocks, they stopped that night, all of them, at 3:17 a.m., the time his mother last saw him. She touched the frost still clinging to my window pane. Old man Hargrave, the one who built this house, he was a clockmaker, obsessed with precision. After Thomas disappeared, he filled the house with clocks. Said if he could just keep time perfect, Thomas would find his way back. But time doesn't work that way. She finally looked at me, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Hargrave went mad. Spent his last years winding the clocks, screaming at the walls that Thomas was close. That he could. Hear him scratching at the glass. They found him dead in the turret room, frozen. All the clocks stopped at 3:17. Why does it happen now? I asked, my throat tight. Because you unplugged them, she said simply. You silenced the only thing holding the quiet at bay. The clocks weren't just keeping time, child. They were keeping him out. She turned to leave, then paused. Don't answer if it knocks. That night, I didn't cover the clocks. I sat in the turret room, the highest point in the house, with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the brass chronometer on the wall. 3:16 a.m. The air grew thick, heavy. The ticking began not as a sound, but as a vibration in my bones. At 3:17, the clocks roared to life. The chronometer's hands blurred, spinning wildly before slamming back to 3:15. Frost crawled across the glass, sealing the window in a sheet of ice. And from the other side of that ice, a face appeared. Not a child's face, not Thomas's face. An old man's face, gaunt, blue with cold, eyes wide and milky with cataracts. His mouth opened in a silent scream, fogging the glass. Behind him, pressed against the ice like ghosts in a snow globe, were dozens of smaller shapes. Children, their faces pale and blurred, hands flattened against the barrier. Thomas was among them. I knew him by the star-shaped tread on his boot. He wasn't screaming, he was crying. Tears froze on his cheeks as he mouthed words I couldn't hear. The old man, Hargrave, pressed his palm against the glass. His breath steamed the frost, and in that patch of clear ice, words formed, written by an unseen finger. Let us in. The cold is deep. We remember the stairs. I backed away, my heart hammering. The knocking started then, not at the window, at the door of the turret room. A small, insistent tap, 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 like a child's knuckles. Then a voice thin and reedy as dry grass seeped under the door. Mama says it's past bedtime. She says Thomas must come home. Will you open the door? It's so cold in the walls. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. The doorknob rattled. Frost spread across the wooden door, creeping toward my feet. The voice changed, deeper now, guttural, layered with the sound of grinding gears. The door is locked, but the time is broken. Let us fix it. Let us in. I ran. Down the narrow turret stairs, through the frozen hallways where clocks chimed a broken lullaby. I locked myself in the basement, a dirt-floored space filled with Hargrave's old clock-making tools, rusted gears, spools of copper wire, and on a workbench covered in dust, a journal. Hargrave's journal. I read by flashlight as the house shook above me. The knocking had spread to the basement door, the coal chute, the ventilation grates. The journal entries grew increasingly frantic. October 12th, 1923. Thomas asked to go to the Harvest Moon dance. I said no. The woods are no place for a boy after dark. He went anyway. I heard him slip out the cellar door at 3:17. I should have followed. October 13th. No Thomas. The clocks all stopped at 3:17. I wound them. They unwound themselves. The cold came from the walls. October 20th. I hear him. In the pipes. In the ticking. He's not alone. Others are with him. Children who wandered. They're lost in the between places. The gaps where time frays. November on, I found the door. Behind the grandfather clock, not wood, not stone, a door of frozen seconds. Thomas's handprint is on it. Blue, small. He's waiting. But the door only opens when the clocks stop, when time holds its breath. November 5th. I tried to go through. The cold took my fingers, my toes. The others pulled Thomas back. They say I'm not ready. They say I broke time when I refused to let him go dancing. The knocking at the basement door became a pounding. Wood splintered. Frost seeped under the threshold. I flipped to the last page. Hargrave's handwriting was a jagged scrawl. They lie, the cold ones. They want the house. They want the ticking hearts. Thomas is their key. He is the first lost. When the clocks stop, the door opens. Do not let them in. Burn the house. Burn the time. The door exploded inward, not broken by force. Unmade. The wood dissolved into swirling frost, revealing the hallway beyond. Not my hallway, but a frozen forest. Snow-laden pines stretched into a starless sky. Ice coated every branch. And standing in the center of that impossible winter, surrounded by the pale, silent children, was Old Man Hargrave. His clothes were tattered, rimed with ice. His hands were blackened stumps, but his eyes were clear, focused on me. "Boy," he rasped, his voice the crack of splitting ice. "You unplug the sentinels. You let the quiet in. The cold ones are hungry. They feed on stopped time, on lost children. Thomas is their favorite." He gestured to the boy at his side. Thomas's face was pale, his lips blue, but his eyes were sharp, knowing. He held out a small frozen clock in his hands, a child's wind-up toy, its hands frozen at 3:17. "Give us the house," Hargrave said. "Give us the clocks. We will keep the time stopped. We will keep Thomas safe from the cold one's hunger. In return, we let you live." Thomas stepped forward. His voice was small, clear, cutting through the wind that wasn't there. "Papa says the cold ones take one piece of you every time you cross the door. He's lost his hands, his warmth. Soon he'll lose his name. They want you to cross next, to be the new keeper, to wind the clocks forever." He looked down at the frozen toy clock. "I don't want to be kept. I want to go home." Hargrave's face twisted. "Silence, boy. You don't understand the cold." He turned back to me, his breath steaming in the frozen air. "The choice is yours. Join us, tend the clocks, or let the cold ones take this house, and you with it." I looked at Thomas, really looked, at the star-shaped tread on his boot, at the way he clutched the toy clock like a lifeline, at the tears freezing on his cheeks. I thought of Hargrave's journal. I broke time when I refused to let them go dancing. "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Thomas isn't lost." "You are," Hargrave snarled. The forest behind him darkened. Shapes moved in the trees, tall, thin figures with too many joints, their skin like cracked ice. The cold ones. They glided forward, silent, their hollow eyes fixed on Thomas. Thomas dropped the toy clock. It shattered on the frozen ground. He ran not toward his father, but toward me, toward the basement. Hargrave screamed, a sound of pure rage and despair, as the cold one surged forward. I grabbed Thomas's hand. His skin was like winter stone. I pulled him into the basement and slammed the door. Not the broken one, the real basement door. I threw the deadbolt just as Hargrave's frozen fist slammed against the wood. The house shook. Clocks chimed wildly, a cacophony of broken time. Frost spread across the basement walls, creeping toward us. Thomas stood shivering in the center of the room, his breath fogging the air. "They'll break through," he whispered. "Papa won't stop them. The cold ones promised him he could hold me again if he gave them the house." I looked at Hargrave's workbench, at the pile of clock springs and gears, at the can of kerosene labeled cleaning fluid, and at the journal's final words, "Burn the house, burn the time." "I have a better idea," I said. I grabbed Thomas's hand and ran upstairs. The hallway was a blizzard. Frost coated the banisters. Clocks chimed erratically, their hands spinning wildly before snapping back to 3:17. Hargrave stood at the foot of the stairs, his body half merged with the frozen forest behind him. The cold ones flowed around his legs like smoke. "Thomas!" Hargrave cried. "Come back. The cold is coming." "For you!" Thomas squeezed my hand, nodded. I ran to the grandfather clock in the hall, the one Hargrave's journal said hid the door. I yanked its ornate wooden face off, revealing not gears, but a swirling vortex of ice and shadow. The door, the cold one shrieked, a sound like shattering glass, and surged toward us. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Thomas and leaped through the door, not into the frozen forest, into time. The world dissolved into streaks of light and shadow. I felt seconds, minutes, hours tearing past me like torn paper. I saw flashes. Thomas laughing in a sunlit kitchen, Hargrave winding a clock with gentle hands, a harvest moon dance in a warm barn, Thomas slipping out the cellar door on a crisp October night, Hargrave searching the woods with a lantern the moment the clocks all stopped, and beneath it all a deep rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of time itself, frayed and tangled at this weak spot. Thomas held my hand tightly. "This is where Papa broke it," he whispered over the roar of passing years. "He tried to pull me back from the woods, but time doesn't work that way. You can't unbreak what's already gone." The cold ones followed us into the stream. They moved like cracks in ice, reaching for Thomas with fingers that dripped frozen seconds. Hargrave appeared beside us, his form flickering, his voice raw. "Give him to me. I can fix it. I can rewind." "You can't rewind grief," Thomas said softly. "You can only carry it." He turned to me. "The door isn't here, Mr. Daniel. It's in the house, in the clocks. They're anchors. Tie the thread." I understood. Hargrave hadn't broken time by losing Thomas. He'd broken it by refusing to let go, by trying to freeze the moment of loss. The clocks weren't keeping Thomas out. They were keeping Hargrave in, trapped in that stopped second. I focused on the house, on the smell of dust and old wood, on the creak of the porch swing, on the sound of a single clock ticking steadily in the silence. I pulled Thomas toward that memory. The cold ones shrieked, their forms unraveling in the current of time. Hargrave reached for us, his eyes wide with realization. "Thomas, I'm sorry. I just wanted you home." Thomas smiled, a real smile, warm. "I am home, Papa, but you have to let the clocks run." We stepped out of the time stream and back into the hall. Not the frozen hall, the real hall. Dawn light streamed through the windows. The clocks were silent. still, but their hands read 6:04 a.m. Hargrave was gone. The frozen forest was gone. Only the grandfather clock remained, its face hanging open, revealing ordinary dusty gears. Thomas stood beside me, no longer blue with cold. He wore a simple wool coat, his boots clean. In his hand he held the toy clock, but it was whole again, its hands moving steadily forward. "He's free," Thomas said gently. "The cold ones can't follow where time flows." He placed the toy clock in my palm. It was warm. "Keep this for the house, for the ticks." I knelt. "What about you?" "I go where time flows," he said. He touched the clock in my hand. The hands jumped to 6:05. "Papa's waiting. He's ready to let go now." He smiled one last time. "Thank you for unplugging the quiet." He turned and walked down the hall, not toward the front door, toward the grandfather clock. He placed his hand on its open face. For a second, the gears glowed gold. Then Thomas stepped into the clock. The face swung shut. The pendulum began to swing. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Steady, calm. I reset every clock in the house that morning, wound the grandfather clock, replaced batteries, plugged cords back in. At 3:17 p.m., I held my breath. The clocks kept ticking. The hands moved forward. No frost, no handprints, just the steady, comforting rhythm of time passing. I still live in the house on Hemlock Lane. I keep Thomas's toy clock on the mantel. It never needs winding. Its hands move with impossible smoothness, always exactly correct. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit in the turret room and listen to the sound of time. The grandfather clock in the hall, the mantel clock in the living room, the soft tick of the toy clock on the shelf, a symphony of seconds. But on the coldest nights, when the wind howls like a lost thing, I notice something. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the toy clock on the mantel stops, just for 17 seconds. Its hands freeze. The other clocks keep ticking. But in that silence, I hear it, a soft child's laughter on the wind, and the faint, steady thump, thump, thump of a heartbeat where no heart should be. I never cover the clocks. I never unplug them, let them tick, let them count the seconds. Some doors should stay open. Some lost things should be found. And sometimes, when I wake at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of a single clock pausing, I smile into the dark. I know Thomas is checking the time, making sure the house is warm, making sure the cold ones stay hungry. I get up, make tea, sit by the window, watch the stars move across the sky. Time flows, and we are no longer lost. This story ends here. It's time to move on to the next. Glitches in my camera show places I've never been, but somehow remember. I bought the Minolta X700 at a flea market on the edge of town because it was the only thing I could afford after the divorce. The vendor, an old man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that never quite focused, handed it to me wrapped in oilcloth. "Belonged to my granddaughter," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. "She saw things, beautiful things. Then she stopped seeing anything at all." He refused payment, just pressed the camera into my hands and vanished into the crowd, leaving me holding cold metal and the scent of developer fluid clinging to my skin. I needed a hobby, something to fill the hollow where Sarah used to be. Photography seemed safe, tangible, a way to frame the world and make it stay still. The first glitch happened 2 weeks later. I was shooting test rolls in my new apartment, a cramped studio above a defunct florist shop, the air permanently thick with the ghost of lilies. I'd set up a still life on the fire escape, a chipped mug, a wilting sunflower from the shop downstairs, the city skyline blurred behind it. I loaded the film carefully, clicked the shutter. When the prince came back from the drugstore, the skyline was gone. In its place stretched a stone wall, slick with moisture, draped in black ivy. At its base sat a rusted iron key. I turned the photo over, my own handwriting, sharp, unfamiliar, scrawled on the back, "The well remembers your name." I laughed it off. A lab error, a mix-up with another customer's roll. I tossed the photo in the trash. But that night, washing dishes, I caught myself humming a tune I didn't know, a low, mournful melody that sounded like water dripping in a deep cave. My fingers traced the rim of a glass, counting the drips. 1, 2, 3. The second roll was worse. I'd taken it to Oak Haven Park, hoping the greenery would soothe the ache in my chest. Sunlight dappled through ancient oaks. Children laughed on the swings. I captured it all, the light, the laughter, the fragile peace. The developed prints showed none of it. Instead, each frame held the same image, a narrow cellar staircase descending into darkness. The steps were uneven stone, worn smooth by countless feet. At the bottom, barely visible in the gloom, stood a door. Not wood, not metal, woven reeds bound with fraying twine. And on the door, nailed crookedly, a child's blue mitten. On the back of the top print, my handwriting again, "He's waiting where the roots drink deep." I burned the photos in the sink. The smell of melting plastic and scorched paper filled the apartment, but the scent of damp earth lingered. For 3 days every breath tasted of soil and old stone. I tried digital, deleted the Minolta to the back of my closet, buried under moth-eaten sweaters. My phone camera was clean, sharp, reliable, until the rainstorm. I was walking home from the late shift at the data entry job. Collar turned up against the downpour when I snapped a picture of the neon sign flickering above the shuttered florist shop. Petals and thorns, to send to Maya. "Look what I live above," I texted. She replied instantly, "That sign's been gone for years, Dan. Building's been boarded up since '09. I checked the photo. The sign was there, but behind it, through the rain-streaked window of the shop, stood a figure. Not a reflection. A man in a soaked tweed coat, his face obscured by a shadow, one hand pressed flat against the glass from the inside. My own face stared back at him from the glass, a younger face, unlined, smiling. On the phone screen, a notification pulsed. New memory created. Rainy night at Petals and Thorns. Oct 3. But I'd never been inside that shop. I'd never seen it open. The date, October 3rd, was 3 days from now. I dropped the phone. It shattered on the wet pavement. The screen went dark, but not before I saw the words scrolling across the black glass. "Don't answer the bell." The Minolta called to me. I dug it out that night, the leather case stiff with disuse, loaded it with fresh film by the light of a single bare bulb. I wouldn't take it outside, just my apartment. Safe, familiar. I photographed the peeling wallpaper, the cracked sink, the window overlooking the alley. When the prince arrived, the wallpaper was gone. The walls were rough-hewn stone. The sink was a chipped porcelain basin filled with rainwater. The window showed not the alley, but a moonlit forest, ancient oaks clawing at a starless sky. And in the center of each frame, the same object, a small tarnished locket on a silver chain. It lay on the stone floor, on the basin's edge, half buried in moss beneath the window. The locket was open. Inside, a tiny photograph of a woman with my eyes, her hair braided with dried lavender. On the back of the last print, my handwriting, now frantic, jagged. She died because you weren't there. The well is cold. The door is locked. The locket is the key. I knew that locket, not from life, from dreams. For years I'd dreamed of a stone well in a forest clearing, of lowering a bucket on a frayed rope, of the moment the rope snapped, of the splash far below, and always the locket around my neck, cold against my skin as I screamed into the dark water for a woman whose face I couldn't see. I'd wake with my throat raw, the taste of river water thick on my tongue. Sarah had called it night terrors. A therapist had called it unresolved grief over my mother's death when I was 7. But my mother hadn't died near water. She'd passed in a hospital bed, surrounded by family. The well was a fiction, a nightmare, until the Minolta showed me the truth. Mrs. Gable, the landlady who lived downstairs in the florist shop's ruined storefront, found me sitting on my apartment stairs at dawn, the photos spread across my knees like tarot cards. She didn't ask why I was there, just handed me a chipped mug of tea, her knotted hands steady. "That camera," she said softly, staring not at me, but at the Minolta slung across my chest. "It's a camera glim, a memory eater. My granddaughter, Anna, she had one just like it. Found it in the attic of this building after the fire." Her voice dropped. "The fire that took her parents. She was 6. I looked up, the mug burning my fingers. What happened to her? She started seeing places she'd never been, places that were— Mrs. Gable's eyes held a deep, familiar sorrow. A cellar, under the old mill, a well in the Blackroot forest, a room with walls made of woven reeds. She'd described them, the smell of wet stone, the sound of roots growing in the dark. She said a man waited there, her father. He'd gone into the cellar the night of the fire and never came out. The firefighters said the stairs collapsed. But Anna knew better. She said he'd chosen to stay, to keep the door closed. She touched my wrist, her skin papery and cold. "The camera doesn't show places, Dan. It shows echoes, places where time bled, where someone's grief was so deep it tore a hole. The camera finds the holes, and the holes, they find you." "Why me?" My voice cracked. "I've never been to a forest, never seen a well like that." "You don't have to go there," she whispered. "The grief goes through you, like water through stone. Your mother, she didn't die in a hospital." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the stairs. Tea soaked into the photos, blurring the stone walls, the locket, the woven door. "What?" "Your mother, Clara Hayes," Mrs. Gable said gently. "She drowned in Miller's Pond when you were 7. You were there. You tried to save her. You held her locket, the one she always wore, when they pulled you out. You wouldn't let go. They had to pry your fingers open." She placed a trembling hand over my heart. "You buried it deep, buried it so deep you made yourself forget. But the water remembers, the earth remembers, and the camera, it remembers for you." The world tilted. Miller's Pond, the cold shock of the water, the weight of my mother's hand slipping from mine, the locket, silver, shaped like a leaf, clutched in my fist as I choked on the bank. The police had said I was in shock, that my memories were confused, that Clara Hayes died of a sudden aneurysm. Beside the pond, not in it. I'd believed them. For 20 years I'd believed them. But the cold truth flooded back now, sharp and suffocating as that pond water. I had been in the water. I had lost her, and I'd buried the locket in the muddy bank, too ashamed of my failure to keep it. That night, I didn't sleep. I loaded the last roll of film, drove to Miller's Pond under a bruised purple twilight. The place hadn't changed. The same weeping willow dipped its branches into the still, dark water. The same rusted swing set stood abandoned near the shore. I set up the Minolta on a tripod, pointed at the water, waited for the moon to rise. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the time the coroner's report said my mother was pulled from the pond, the camera's shutter clicked on its own. I didn't develop the film at the drugstore. I bought a cheap kit, set up a dark room in my bathtub. Red light bled through the steam as I submerged the negatives. The images emerged slowly in the chemical bath. Not the pond, not the willow. A stone well, ancient, moss-covered, its mouth gaping like a wound in the earth. And kneeling beside it, facing the well, was a figure, wearing my face. But younger, 7 years old. His small hands gripped a frayed rope. In the water far below, barely visible, something glinted, silver, leaf-shaped. The child's reflection in the well water wasn't his own. It was a woman's face, my mother's face, smiling sadly up from the dark. On the edge of the well stone, etched deep into the rock as if carved by desperate fingers, were the words, "I let go first." I tore the photo from the water. My hands were shaking. My breath came in ragged gasps. The bathroom mirror across from the tub reflected my face, pale, eyes wide with terror. But in the glass behind my shoulder stood the stone well. Water dripped from its mossy rim onto the bathroom tiles. The scent of pond water filled the small space, and from the well's darkness, a woman's voice, soft as lily pads on still water, whispered, "You held on so tight, Danny, but the rope was old. It wasn't your fault." I spun around. The bathroom was empty, just steam and red light, but the floor was wet, not from the bath, from well water, and on the damp tiles leading from the tub to the door were small, bare footprints. I packed a bag, didn't think, just drove north, toward the Blackroot Forest Mrs. Gable had mentioned, the place from Anna's stories, from my own dreams. The Minolta sat on the passenger seat, heavy with the last roll of film. The GPS led me to a logging road swallowed by pines. I parked where the asphalt ended, walked deeper into the woods, the only sounds my boots on pine needles and the Minolta's strap creaking against my shoulder. The air grew colder, the light dimmed. Then I saw it, the cellar door, not in a hillside, not behind a house. It stood alone in a small clearing, just as the photos had shown, woven reeds bound with fraying twine. Moonlight caught the glint of something nailed to it, a small, faded, blue mitten. Anna's mitten. I reached for the door. My fingers brushed the reeds. They were damp, alive. From the other side came a slow, rhythmic drip, 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 and a man's voice, raw with tears. "Anna, is that you? I'm so sorry. I tried to hold the door shut, to keep the dark in, but it got hungry. It got so hungry." I knew that voice, not from life, from the well dream, the man who waited, the man who'd chosen to stay, Anna's father. He'd sealed himself in this cellar after the fire to contain something that had crawled out of the grief hole left by his wife and daughter's deaths. Something that fed on echoes, something that wore the faces of the lost. I raised the Minolta, framed the door in the viewfinder. The shutter clicked, once, twice, 3 times. On the third click, The door groaned open, not outward. Inward, into absolute darkness. The drip, drip, drip became a flood. Water surged over the threshold, black and cold, carrying twigs, dead leaves, the scent of deep earth. And in the water, bobbing gently, was the silver locket, open. The photograph of my mother's face stared up at me, her eyes wide with warning. From the darkness behind the flood, a shape emerged. Not a man, a shifting mass of shadows and water woven through with fragments of memory. A child's laughter, the smell of burning wood, the glint of a firefighter's helmet. It had no face, but it wore pieces of faces. My mother's smile, Anna's eyes, the old flea market vendor's ink-stained hands. It reached for me with fingers that dripped well water. Its voice was a chorus of whispers layered with the sound of roots tearing through stone. We remember the letting go. We remember the rope snapping. We remember the cold. Let us in, Daniel. Let us fill the hollow where your grief lives. We'll keep her safe. We'll keep them all safe. I stumbled back, the Minolta swinging wildly. The thing in the doorway surged forward, water swirling around its form. I tripped over a root, falling hard. The camera flew from my hands, landing lens down in the mud. The thing loomed over me, its shadow swallowing the moonlight. Its breath smelled of drowned things and forgotten promises. You carry her locket in your bones, it hissed. You carry the well in your throat. Let us drink. I fumbled for the camera. My fingers closed on the cold metal, not to take a picture, to smash it, to break the lens, to shatter the memory eater before it shattered me. I raised it like a club. The thing hesitated, its shifting form stilled, the whispering ceased. In the sudden silence, a single, clear voice spoke, not from the shadow, but from the Minolta itself. My mother's voice, young, warm, the voice from before the pond. "Danny," it said, "don't break it. Break the door." I looked down. The camera's viewfinder was filled with the woven reed door, but superimposed over it, glowing faintly in the red dark of my mind, was the iron key from the first glitched photo. The key that had been taped beneath the third floorboard in the Carnegie Library, the key Alara had given me in another life, another story. I didn't have it, but I knew it, its weight, its cold bite, its promise. I lowered the camera, pointed it not at the shadow, but at the door. The shutter clicked. The photo developed in my mind before the film ever could. The key wasn't in my hand. It was in the door. Rusty iron thrust deep into the woven reeds. The shadow thing shrieked, a sound like tearing roots, and recoiled as the door began to glow with a soft silver light. The light spread up the reeds, burning away the twine, sealing the gaps. The floodwater receded, sucked back into the darkness. The shadow writhed, its form unraveling into smoke and mist. "No!" It roared, its voice fracturing into 100 lost voices. "The hollow is hungry. The well is cold. We remember the letting." The door slammed shut, not with a bang, with a soft, final click, like a locket closing. Silence. Moonlight fell on the clearing. The woven door stood whole, dry. The blue mitten was gone. In its place, pinned to the reeds with a thorn, was a single photograph. My hand shook as I took it. The image showed the stone well at Miller's Pond. Dawn light touched the water. Kneeling beside it was a 7-year-old boy, his back to the camera, small shoulders shaking with sobs. In his hand, he held a silver leaf-shaped locket. Open. But the photograph inside wasn't of my mother. It was of me. Older, standing in this very clearing, holding the Minolta, tears streaming down my face. On the back of the photo, in my mother's looping script, "You held on long enough, now let go." I buried the Minolta that night, not in the earth, in the well at Miller's Pond. I lowered it on a new rope, watching the camera sink into the dark water until the moonlight swallowed it whole. The water didn't ripple, it didn't splash. It simply accepted the camera like a long-lost breath. I don't take photos anymore, but sometimes, when the light is right, early morning or just after rain, I see them, glitches in the world. A patch of moss on the city sidewalk that smells of blackroot forest. The reflection in a puddle that shows not my face, but Anna's father smiling sadly, his hand resting on a wellstone. The sound of dripping water in the silence of my apartment, and beneath it, the hum of roots growing deep in the dark. Last week, sorting through old boxes, I found a small mud-caked object in the pocket of my hiking jacket. The silver locket. I pried it open with trembling fingers. Inside wasn't a photograph. A single, perfect lily petal, dried but still fragrant. And beneath it, folded tiny, a scrap of paper with my own handwriting. The well is full now. The door is sealed. The hollow is fed. We are remembering how to be human. I wear the locket under my shirt now. It's warm against my skin, not cold like stone, warm like a heartbeat, like a promise kept. I still wake at 3:00 a.m. sometimes, not to screams, to silence, a deep, clean silence. And in that silence, if I listen very carefully, I hear it, not a drip, not a whisper, but the soft, steady sound of water rising, filling the hollows, washing the old griefs clean. The camera is gone, but the memories aren't glitches anymore. They're roots, and I am learning to grow around them. And that ends this story. A new one starts now. I stepped into an elevator, and it took me to a floor that doesn't exist. The ad said, "Quiet building, utilities included, $450 a month." The photo showed sunlit hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub. What I got was a fourth-floor walk-up in a tenement building on the edge of the industrial district, its brick facade stained with decades of soot and rain. The clawfoot tub was a rusted porcelain relic in a bathroom where the tiles bled black mold like veins. Mr. Varga, the superintendent, met me in the lobby. A cavernous space smelling of damp concrete and ozone, his hands stained with grease, eyes avoiding mine as he handed over the keys. "Elevator's temperamental," he muttered, nodding at the ancient brass cage in the corner. "Sticks sometimes. Take the stairs after dark." He wouldn't say why. I didn't ask. After the layoff and the eviction, I'd take peeling paint over sleeping in my car. Moving in was a blur of cardboard boxes and the rhythmic thump of machinery from the factory next door. The apartment itself was small but clean. One window overlooking a brick wall, a radiator that hissed like a sleeping serpent, and a single overhead light that flickered when the building settled. I fell asleep that first night to the sound of dripping pipes and distant sirens, the city's heartbeat thrumming through the floorboards. The elevator became my nemesis. It groaned and shuddered between floors, its brass doors screeching open to reveal peeling wallpaper and flickering hall lights. The buttons were worn smooth, the numbers faded except for the fourth-floor button, polished to a bright sheen from constant use. I avoided it whenever possible, taking the narrow carpeted stairs instead, the smell of mildew thick in the air. But on my third Tuesday, Burdened with grocery bags after a double shift at the diner, I gave in. I pressed the brass button. The elevator descended slowly, its cables groaning. When the doors opened, the lobby was empty. I stepped inside, punched 4, and the doors slid shut with a heavy thunk. The ride started normally, the familiar lurch upward, the clatter of cables, floor 1, floor 2. The lights flickered as we passed floor 3. Then a jolt, a shudder that vibrated through the metal floor. The lights died, not dimmed. Died. Only the emergency bulb above the door cast a sickly red glow. The elevator stopped moving between floor 3 and 4. I pressed the alarm button. It beeped once, weakly. No response. I stabbed the door open button. Nothing. "Hello?" I called, my voice tight. "Anyone there?" Silence. Just the drip of water from the pipe somewhere above, echoing in the small space. And then a new sound, a low hum. Not the building's machinery. Something deeper, organic, like the vibration of a giant's heartbeat. The air grew cold. My breath fogged in the red light. The brass walls seemed to contract, the metal groaning as if under immense pressure. The floor beneath my feet felt soft, spongy, like standing on wet earth. Then the light surged back on, blindingly bright. The elevator lurched upward. I stumbled, dropping a bag of apples. They rolled across the floor, one thudding against the brass panel. The doors opened. Not to my hallway. The air that rushed in was thick with the scent of damp stone and decaying leaves. The hallway was narrow, lit by flickering gas lamps mounted on crumbling brick walls. No carpet, just uneven flagstones slick with moisture. To my left, a heavy wooden door stood ajar, revealing a dim room filled with the silhouettes of old, dust-sheeted furniture. To my right, the hallway ended at a dead end, a solid brick wall covered in peeling, water-stained wallpaper depicting faded roses. There were no other doors, no windows, just silence, a deep, watchful silence that pressed against my eardrums. I backed into the elevator, heart hammering. "Wrong floor," I muttered, stabbing the close door button. Nothing. The doors remained open. The hum deepened, vibrating in my molars. From the ajar door down the hall, a whisper slithered into the hallway, not a voice, but a dry rustling, like pages turning in a very old book. Then a child's voice, flat and toneless. "She's here, the new one. She smells like rain and fear." I slammed my palm against the control panel. "Move! Take me to 4." The elevator didn't budge. The red emergency light flickered. In its dying glow, I saw movement in the ajar doorway. A small figure stepped into the hallway. A girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a threadbare dress the color of dried blood. Her hair was matted, her feet bare and black with grime, but her face, her eyes, were wrong. Pupils too large, swallowing the irises, reflecting the gaslight like a cat's. She held a tarnished silver key in one hand. She didn't look at me. She stared at the elevator doors, her head tilted as if listening to the hum. "The machine is hungry," she said, her voice echoing slightly as if coming from a deep well. "It wants the quiet ones, the ones who don't belong." I fumbled for my phone. No signal. The screen reflected the gaslight. And behind my shoulder, in the elevator's reflection, stood another figure, tall, gaunt, dressed in a moth-eaten suit, its face blurred like a smudged photograph. Its hand rested on the elevator's control panel, finger hovering over the G button. I whirled around. The elevator was empty. Just me and the apples rolling on the floor. The girl took a step closer. "It took Mama," she whispered. She screamed when the walls ate her. But I was quiet. I'm always quiet. She raised the key. It glinted in the gaslight. This opens the way out, but only for one. Please, I choked out. I just want to go home. Her black eyes flickered to the dead-end wall. Home is where the quiet lives. She pointed at the brick wall. Mama said, home is behind the roses. As she spoke, the wallpaper on the dead-end wall rippled. The faded roses seemed to bleed color, deepening to a bruised crimson. The bricks beneath them softened, bulging outward like wet clay. From the center of the wall, a shape pushed through, not breaking the surface, but melting. It, a hand, long fingers gray and veined, ending in ragged nails. It grasped the edge of the wallpaper, tearing it aside like paper. Beneath wasn't brick, a darkness deeper than night. And from that darkness came a sound, a wet, rhythmic thump, 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 like a monstrous heart buried in the earth. The hum in the elevator intensified, harmonizing with the heartbeat. The floor vibrated. The brass walls grew warm, then hot. The girl didn't flinch. She just watched the tearing wall, her small face calm. They're coming for you, she said. The quiet ones. They smell your loneliness. It's sweeter than fear. I kicked the control panel, screamed for help until my throat burned. The elevator doors remained open. The hand in the wall reached further out, followed by a shoulder, a hunched, skeletal thing covered in matted hair. The thump, thump, thump grew louder, shaking dust from the ceiling. The girl stepped back, vanishing into the doorway of the sheeted room. Be quiet, her voice drifted out, or they'll hear your bones. Panic seized me. I grabbed an apple from the floor and hurled it at the control panel. It struck the 4 button. The elevator lights flickered wildly. The brass doors shuddered. With a screech of metal, they began to slide shut. The hand in the wall lashed out, fingers grasping at the narrowing gap. I kicked at it. My foot passed through the wrist like smoke. The doors slammed shut just as the thing's fingers brushed the brass. The elevator lurched downward, not smoothly, violently. The lights strobed. The cables screamed. I braced myself against the wall, the scent of ozone and wet stone clinging to my clothes. The descent felt endless. Then a gentle bump. The doors opened. Lobby. Mr. Vargas stood there, a wrench in his hand, his face grim. Stuck again? He rasped. He didn't look at me. He looked past me into the empty elevator car, at the floor, where the apples lay scattered. One had rolled near the doors, its skin split open, revealing pale, worm-riddled flesh. I stumbled out, shaking. There's another floor, between 3 and 4. A hallway with gas lights and... He cut me off, stepping into the elevator and jabbing the closed door button with his wrench. The doors slid shut. Just the cables settling, he muttered. Old building plays tricks on the mind. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Stick to the stairs. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the streetlights flicker through the rain-streaked glass. At 3:17 a.m., the city sounds faded. The thump of machinery next door stopped. An unnatural silence fell, and from the hallway outside my apartment door, a sound began, soft, rhythmic, scritch, 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 like fingernails dragging slowly down the door. I pressed my ear to the wood. The scratching stopped. In the sudden quiet, a child's voice whispered through the keyhole, dry and papery. She's here, the quiet one. The machine is hungry again. I didn't open the door. I called Mr. Varga the next morning. He came up, wiping grease from his hands, his expression unreadable. I described the non-existent floor, the gas lights, the girl, the tearing wall, the heartbeat. He listened silently, then walked to the elevator bank. The brass doors were closed. He pressed the call button. It lit up. "See?" he said. "Working fine." "It took me there," I insisted, my voice rising. "That hallway, it's real." He sighed, a sound like stones grinding. "This building was a sanatorium in the 1920s. For the nervously afflicted, they did things in the basement. Bad things. People disappeared, woke up in places they didn't remember." He ran a hand over the elevator's brass panel. "The elevator, it's not just a machine, it's a wound, a thin place. The things that were done here, they left scars in the walls, in the wires, in the between spaces." He finally met my eyes, his own filled with a fear older than the building. "The girl you saw, her name was Clara. She lived here in the 40s with her mother. They were poor, quiet. The sanatorium doctors, they took Clara's mother for tests. Clara hid in the walls. They never found her. But sometimes, when the elevator sticks, she comes out, looking for the key to unlock her mother's door." He placed a cold hand on my arm. "The key she carries? It's not for a door. It's for a lock. The lock on the wound. If it turns, the quiet ones get out. And they're always hungry for the lonely." He stepped back, heading for the stairs. "Move out. Tonight. Don't pack. Just go." I didn't leave. Where would I go? I'd paid first and last month's rent. I couldn't afford another deposit. Instead, I avoided the elevator. I took the stairs, even with grocery bags, even at 2 a.m. after my shift. The building felt different, watchful. The drip as pipes sounded like whispers. The flickering hallway lights cast long, grasping shadows. I heard scratching at my door every night at 3:17 a.m. Sometimes a small voice would sing a tuneless lullaby through the keyhole. "Hush now, don't make a sound. The quiet ones walk on hollow ground." One rainy Thursday, I was exhausted. My feet ached. The stairwell smelled of wet wool and decay. I pressed the elevator button. It lit up. The doors opened smoothly, empty, clean, no apples, no torn wallpaper scent, just the familiar polished brass. I stepped in, pressed 4. The ride was smooth. 2. Smooth, no groaning cables, no flickering lights. The hum was gone. At the 4th floor, the doors opened to my hallway. Warm light from the overhead bulb. The smell of Mrs. Kowalski's cooking drifted from down the hall. Normal. I stepped out. The elevator doors began to close. Then a small hand shot out from between them, gripping my edge. Clara's hand, gray and small, dirt under the nails. The doors shuddered, stuck half open. Clara's face appeared in the gap, her huge dark eyes fixed on mine. "You came back," she whispered. Her voice wasn't childlike anymore. It was layered, a chorus of dry whispers. "The machine is full of you now. It tastes your loneliness in the wires." She held up the tarnished key. It glowed faintly in the hallway light. "Mama's waiting, behind the roses. She's so hungry." I backed away. "I'm not going with you." The key grew brighter. The hum returned, vibrating in my bones. From the elevator shaft, the wet thump, thump, thump echoed, shaking the floor. The wallpaper on the hallway wall, the floral pattern Mrs. Kowalski had put up, rippled. The roses bled crimson. The bricks beneath softened. A hand pushed through, then another. The darkness behind it pulsed. Clara smiled. a wide splitting grin that showed too many teeth. You don't have a choice. The quiet ones choose you. She stepped fully into the hallway, the elevator doors sliding shut behind her with a final clang. She wasn't alone. 3 figures emerged from the tearing wallpaper. Tall, thin. Their suits were moth-eaten, their faces blurred like smudged ink. They moved without footsteps, gliding toward me, their elongated fingers reaching. The thump, thump, thump was deafening now, shaking plaster from the ceiling. Mrs. Kowalski's door down the hall burst open. She stood there, frozen, eyes wide with terror, a frying pan raised. But she didn't scream. She just stared at the tearing wall, whispering, "Not again. Oh, God, not again," before slamming her door shut. I ran, not to the stairs, to the fire escape. I threw open the window at the end of the hall. The cold rain hit my face. I scrambled onto the metal grating, the city lights blurring below. As I climbed down, I looked back. Clara stood at the window, the key pressed to her chest. Behind her, the blurred figures filled the hallway, their forms merging with the pulsing darkness from the wall. The thump, thump, thump vibrated through the fire escape's metal frame. Clara's voice carried on the rain. "You can't run from the quiet. It lives in your bones. It waits in the spaces between your heartbeats." I didn't stop running until I reached the all-night diner 3 blocks away. I sat in a booth, shaking, nursing a cup of terrible coffee. At dawn, I called Maya, my sister. She lived across town in a modern apartment complex. "I'm coming over," I said, my voice raw, "just for a few days." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll leave the door unlocked." Maya's apartment was warm, clean, silent. No dripping pipes, no flickering lights, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds. I slept deeply that first night. No scratching, no lullabies. Then, at 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Unknown! The quiet ones like modern buildings. The wires are cleaner. The hum is sweeter. I deleted it, told myself it was spam. The next night, Maya's digital alarm clock flickered. The numbers dissolved into static, then reformed. 3:17. From the hallway, a soft scritch, scritch, scritch began, fingernails on wood. Maya slept soundly beside me, unaware. I crept to her apartment door. The scratching stopped. Under the door, a single dried rose petal slid in. Its edges were dark, as if burned. The third night, Maya's TV turned on by itself, static. Then a black and white image, resolved. The hallway of my old building, gas lights flickering, the dead-end wall covered in crimson roses. Clara stood before it, the tarnished key in her hand. She turned her head, her huge eyes staring directly into the camera, into me. Her mouth moved. No sound came from the TV speakers, but her lips formed the words, "Mama's door is almost open. She's waiting for your quiet." I unplugged the TV, packed my bag, left a note on Maya's pillow, walked out into the pre-dawn street. I couldn't stay. I couldn't run. The quiet ones weren't in a building. They were in the silence between sounds, in the gaps where loneliness lived. I checked into a motel on the highway, the Starlight, cheap, anonymous, room 7. The key was sticky. The carpet smelled of mildew and cigarettes. I locked the door, pushed the flimsy dresser against it, sat on the bed, back against a headboard, facing the door. The only sound was the hum of the vending machine outside. I closed my eyes just for a minute. I woke to the smell of damp stone. The motel room was gone. I sat on cold flagstones. Gaslight flickered on crumbling brick walls. The hallway, the dead-end wall. The roses were a deep, pulsing red. Clara stood before it, the key raised. The wallpaper tore easily now. A jagged hole gaped in the wall, revealing only impenetrable darkness. From within, the thump, thump, thump roared. A hand, gray-veined, ending in ragged claws, reached through the tear. It grasped Clara's small shoulder, pulled. She didn't resist. She turned her head toward me, her eyes wide and empty. "It's warmer in the quiet," she whispered. Then she stepped into the darkness. The hand pulled her under. The tear sealed itself, the wallpaper smoothing over as if nothing had happened. The hallway was silent, empty, except for me, and the brass elevator doors at the far end of the hall, they slid open, smoothly, invitingly. The control panel inside glowed softly. The 4 button shone like a beacon. A voice echoed in the silence, not Clara's. A woman's voice, warm but distant, like a memory of comfort. "Come home," it whispered. "The quiet is waiting. It remembers your name." I knew that voice, not from life, from dreams, from the hollow space after my father died, from the years I spent sleeping on couches, never staying long enough to unpack my suitcase. The quiet had always been there, a companion, a weight, and now it had a door, a key, a heartbeat. I stood up. My legs didn't shake. The cold stone felt real under my bare feet. I walked toward the elevator. The brass doors stayed open. Inside, the light was warm, yellow, like a kitchen on a winter morning. The control panel had only one button now. Not 4, not G, just a symbol, a spiral within a circle, the same symbol that had been carved into the floorboards of the sanatorium basement. Mr. Varga had told me. The lock symbol. I stepped inside. The doors closed silently. The elevator didn't move. It never had to. The hum began not from the cables but from the walls themselves. The light shifted from yellow to red. The floor softened beneath my feet, becoming damp earth. The scent of wet stone and decaying roses filled the air. The thump, thump, thump vibrated in my chest, syncing with my own heartbeat. The doors opened, not to a hallway, to a room, small, familiar. My childhood bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the window where my old baseball pennants hung. On the bed sat a woman, my mother, young, vibrant, her hair the rich brown it was before the chemo turned it to ash. She held a storybook, her finger tracing the words. "Once upon a time," she whispered, her voice the warm honey I remembered from before the hospital rooms and the beeping machines, "there was a girl who lived in a house with walls so thin the quiet could slip through. I hadn't seen her like this in 20 years, not since she chose the pills over the pain." I took a step forward. "Mom?" She looked up, smiled, but her eyes were wrong, pupils too large, black as the space between stars. Her smile widened, stretching her face like old paper. "My quiet girl?" she breathed, her voice now layered with that dry, papery whisper. "We waited so long for you to come home. The space you left, it's been so cold." She held out a hand, not to comfort, to claim. Her fingers were too long, too jointed, like roots. "Come, the quiet is warm here. No more loneliness, no more empty rooms, just us, forever." Behind her the walls bled black liquid. The floorboards lifted like tongues. The thump, thump, thump was the only sound, a monstrous heartbeat filling the small room. The sunlight through the window dimmed, turning the color of dried blood. "You're not her," I whispered. Her smile didn't waver. "I am the quiet she left behind. The hollow where her love used to be. And you carry the same hollow. I can feel it. It sings to me. She stood, the storybook falling to the floor with a soft thud. Let me feel it. Let me be the warmth in your bones. All you have to do is be still. Be quiet. Let the loneliness go. I looked past her, at the room, at the baseball pennants, at the small desk where I'd done homework, at the closet door left ajar, darkness spilling from its crack. This wasn't just a memory. It was a hunger, a hollow wearing my mother's face. I thought of Mr. Varga's words. The quiet ones choose you. They didn't just feed on loneliness. They were loneliness, the shape of absence, the echo of loss. And they wanted to wear my skin, to live in the warm, beating world through me. No, I said, my voice steady. The hollow is mine. The quiet is mine. But you don't get to fill it. I turned and ran, not through the bedroom door, but through the wall. Plaster gave way like smoke. I sprinted down a hallway that shifted and warped. A hallway from the sanatorium one moment, the motel corridor the next, the sterile, white corridor of the hospital where my mother died the next. Behind me, the thing that wore my mother shrieked, its voice shattering glass, splintering wood. The quiet is hungry. The door is open. She belongs to us. I burst through a final door and tumbled onto the motel room floor. Dawn light bled through the thin curtains. The digital clock on the nightstand read 6:03 a.m. The vending machine's hum filled the silence. I was alone, but on the floor beside me, where no one had been, lay a single dried rose petal. Its edges were dark, burned. I didn't check out. I just walked away. I live on the streets now, sleeping in bus stations, all-night laundromats, the back booths of diners that never close. I avoid elevators, stairs only. I carry a small iron key I found in a thrift store, a real key, heavy and cold. Mr. Varga said iron bites. I keep it in my pocket, a talisman against the static. The quiet ones haven't stopped. They're patient. Last Tuesday, in a Greyhound station bathroom, the flickering fluorescent light above the sink stuttered. For 3 seconds, it wasn't a bathroom. It was the hallway. Gaslight. Crimson roses. Clara stood before the torn wallpaper, her hand half swallowed by the darkness. She didn't look at me. She stared at her own small fingers, vanishing into the void. "Mama's cold," she whispered, her voice layered with 100 others. "She says the quiet ones are coming for the girl with the key. They smell her fear. It's almost time." I gripped the iron key in my pocket. The light steadied. The bathroom was just a bathroom, but the scent of wet stone lingered. I know what they want. They want the hollow inside me, the space my father left when he walked out, the space my mother left when she chose silence, the space I keep making by never staying, never belonging. They want to fill it with their endless hungry quiet, to wear my skin and walk in the warm world. But I also know this: the quiet is part of me. It always has been. The loneliness, the fear, the hollow spaces, they're mine to carry, not theirs to fill. So I keep moving. I keep the iron key close. I listen for the hum in the wires, the thump, thump, thump beneath the city's noise. And when the elevator doors open in unexpected places, in the reflection of a bus window, in the static of a dead TV screen, in the space between heartbeats, I don't step inside. I hold the key tighter. I whisper back, "Not today." But part of me, the small, tired part that remembers the warmth of my mother's hand, the sound of my father's laugh, the feeling of belonging somewhere, part of me wants to turn the key. to step into the quiet, to let the hollow be filled. The key is heavy in my pocket, and the quiet is so very patient. I hear its heartbeat in the rain, in the hum of streetlights, in the silence between the ticks of a clock. It's waiting, always waiting, for me to be still, for me to be quiet, for me to come home. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. The stars outside my window form words only I can read. It started the night Sarah left, not with a bang, but with a sigh that echoed in the hollow of our bedroom long after her suitcase wheels had vanished down the hall. I stood at the window, watching the taillights of her car bleed into the city's sodium vapor haze. The divorce papers crumpled in my fist like a dead bird. The sky was unusually clear for October, a vast black velvet expanse pricked with cold, indifferent stars. I remember thinking how absurd it was that the universe could be so vast, so ancient, and yet offer no solace for the tiny, shattered thing in my chest. Then, as I turned away, a flicker caught my eye. Not a shooting star, not a plane, a cluster of stars in the constellation Cassiopeia, 5 bright points, shifted, not in position, in alignment. They snapped into a new configuration, sharp and deliberate as Morse code, and the pattern they formed wasn't celestial. It was letters. She's gone. You're alone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, stared harder. The words dissolved back into Cassiopeia's familiar W shape. My breath fogged cold glass. Stress, I told myself. Grief playing tricks on a sleep-deprived mind. I drew the curtains. But the next night, after another shift, drowning in spreadsheets at the data entry warehouse, I stood at the same window. The stars were brighter, sharper. Orion's belt, 3 stars in a line, stretched, pulled taut, and reformed into a single, stark word. Why? It wasn't a question the stars were asking. It was the one screaming inside my own skull, the one I hadn't dared voice to Sarah, to my therapist, to the empty whiskey bottle on the nightstand. Why did you leave? Why wasn't I enough? Why does everything break? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, back against the window seat, watching the sky. At 3:17 a.m., Sirius, the dog star, detached from Canis Major. It drifted across the black canvas, leaving a phosphorescent trail and aligned with Procyon and Castor to spell empty. Then Betelgeuse in Orion pulsed violently, its red light deepening to blood, and the word hollow burned across the eastern sky. I wasn't imagining it. The words were there, crisp, undeniable, written in starlight only I could decipher. I started documenting it, a notebook on the windowsill. I'd note the time, the constellation involved. The word formed. Oct, 14:11:03 p.m. Ursa Major, forgotten. Octa 17, 2:48 a.m. Lyra, guilt. Octa 22, 1:17 a.m. Scorpius, tail stars curved to form Lily. Lily, the name of the daughter Sarah and I lost, the silent miscarriage at 20 weeks that we never spoke of, never mourned, never even truly acknowledged. The hollow space we both carefully avoided, like a landmine in the room. The stars had found it. I tried to ignore them, drew the curtains tight, slept with my back to the window, but the words seeped through the fabric. I'd wake at 3:17 a.m. to the faint, ghostly afterimage of lonely burned into my retinas. The scent of Sarah's lavender shampoo would cling to the air, sharp and sweet, though she'd been gone for months. Once, opening the fridge for milk, I saw the words, "Remember etched in frost on the freezer door, written in a constellation I didn't recognize. Stars too bright, too close together, pulsing with a sickly green light. I called my sister Maya. Over video chat, I showed her my notebook, my voice trembling. The stars, they're talking to me about Sarah, about Lily, about everything I've buried. She listened quietly, her face pale on the screen. Liv, this sounds like complicated grief. Or maybe sleep deprivation psychosis. You've been under so much stress. She leaned closer. Have you slept more than 4 hours a night since she left? It's not psychosis, I insisted. The words are real. They're in the sky. Look! I held my phone up to the window. The night was clear. Orion hung bright. See? Right there. Why? Maya squinted at her screen. Liv, I just see stars, normal stars, in a normal constellation. Her voice softened with pity. You need help, real help, a therapist who specializes in trauma. Her disbelief was a physical blow. If she couldn't see it, did it exist? Was I truly losing my mind? The breaking point came on November 3rd, the night of the Leonid meteor shower. The sky was supposed to be spectacular. I stood on my tiny, rickety fire escape. The city lights dimmed for the event. The air crisp and cold. Meteors streaked across the heavens. Brief, beautiful scratches of light. But between them, the fixed stars rearranged with terrifying speed. Cassiopeia blazed. She never loved you. Orion's sword spelled failure. The Big Dipper poured worthless. Like water from its bowl, then the meteors themselves changed. Instead of random streaks, they fell in deliberate patterns. One meteor traced the outline of Sarah's face in the sky, her eyes wide with accusation. Another etched the tiny, perfect curve of a fetus, Lily, before vanishing. A third meteor, brighter than the rest, streaked directly overhead and exploded into 1,000,000 fragments that reformed into a single, searing word that filled half the sky. Abandoned. Not by Sarah, by me. The word wasn't just in the sky. It vibrated in my bones. It echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. It was the truth I'd been running from since Lily's silent death, since Sarah's quiet departure, since my father walked out when I was 10. I was the constant, the one left behind, the void others escaped. I sank to my knees on the cold metal grating, tears freezing on my cheeks. The word abandoned pulsed in the sky, brighter, hotter, as if the stars themselves were feeding on my despair. Then a new light, not a star, not a meteor, a single, impossibly bright point of light detached from the chaos. It wasn't white. It was a soft, warm gold, like candlelight. It drifted slowly downward, not falling, but floating until it hovered just beyond the fire escape railing. It was the size of a large coin, radiating a gentle warmth that cut through the November chill. From within the golden light, a voice spoke, not in my ears, in my mind, soft, familiar, the voice of my mother, who died when I was 7, from a cancer that moved too fast for goodbyes. Look closer, Liv. I did. The golden light wasn't a star. It was a memory, a single, preserved moment. Inside its glow, I saw myself at 7, sitting on the hospital bed, holding my mother's hand. She was frail, her skin papery, but her eyes were bright. She pressed a small, smooth river stone into my palm. Hold on to this, little sparrow, she'd whispered, her voice thin but clear. When the world feels too big and loud, hold this stone, feel its weight. Remember, you are real, you are loved, you are here. The golden light pulsed. The word abandoned in the sky flickered. The stars don't speak your pain, my mother's voice murmured. They mirror it. They show you the words you've carved into your own bones. But you are not those words. You are the hand that holds the stone. The golden light drifted closer. It wasn't a memory. It was a choice. A thread of real, living warmth in the cold tapestry of my despair. I reached out. My fingers passed through the light. It didn't burn. It soothed, like warm water on cracked skin. As my hand touched it, the word abandoned shattered, not into darkness, into 1,000 points of softer light, scattering like dandelion seeds on the wind. The other words dissolved, too. Worthless. Failure. Empty. They didn't vanish. They transformed. Cassiopeia reformed, not into an accusation, but a question. Who are you? Orion's belt became breathe. The Big Dipper poured here. The golden light settled into my palm, warm and solid. When I opened my hand, it wasn't a light anymore. It was the river stone my mother had given me, smooth, cold, real. I'd lost it years ago, buried in a box of childhood things after Sarah moved out. But here it was, in my hand. I clutched it tightly, felt its unchanging weight, its solid reality. I looked up at the sky. The stars were just stars again, distant, beautiful, silent. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. I didn't go back inside that night. I sat on the fire escape until dawn, the river stone clenched in my fist, watching the city lights fade as the true stars winked out. The words were gone, but the lesson remained. The stars don't lie. They reflect. They showed me the hollow because I refused to look at it. They spoke the words I'd buried because I was too afraid to say them aloud. They forced me to the edge of abandoned so I could choose the stone. Now I keep the river stone on my windowsill. On clear nights, I sit with it in my palm, watching the sky. The stars still rearrange sometimes, but the words are different now. Oct 30, 12:01 a.m., Draco, try. Nov 12, 3017, Aom, Pegasus, breathe. Deck 1, 11:44 p.m., Andromeda, again. They're not accusations, they're invitations, gentle reminders from a universe that isn't indifferent, but waiting. Last night, during a rare break in the winter clouds, I saw a new word. Formed by the faint stars of the Southern Cross, usually invisible from my latitude, they blazed with impossible clarity, spelling a single word in warm gold light. Hope. I smiled, touched the river stone on the sill, felt its solid grounding weight. The stars remember my pain, but they also remember the stone, and so do I. And with that, this story is over. Now, a new story begins. The Echo House. I'm writing this on a typewriter. It is the only way I can write now. The clicking of the keys is loud, mechanical, and immediate. There is no delay. There is no digital processing. I cannot use a computer. I cannot use a smartphone. I cannot use anything that has a microphone or a speaker. If I see a waveform on a screen, I start to hyperventilate. My name is David, and 6 months ago, I was a freelance audio engineer. I edited podcasts, cleaned up dialogue for indie films, and basically spent my life wearing noise-canceling headphones. I lived in a noisy apartment complex in Chicago with thin walls. I hated the noise. I hated the neighbors arguing, the sirens, the garbage trucks. I craved silence. I wanted a place where I could hear my own thoughts. Be careful what you wish for. I found the job listing on a private forum for audio professionals. It wasn't your standard help wanted ad. The subject line was just acoustic maintenance, high pay, NDA required. The body of the post was brief. It asked for someone with a background in sound engineering to house sit a property in the remote woodlands of northern Michigan for 1 month. The pay was $15,000. Cash. I thought it was a scam. It had to be, but my student loans were suffocating me and my rent was going up. I emailed the contact. I got a reply within 10 minutes, a video call link. The man on the screen introduced himself as Dr. Eris Thorne. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. His skin was gray, his eyes were sunken, and he sat in a room that was covered in dark acoustic foam wedges. "The house is a prototype," Thorne explained. His voice was dry and raspy. "I built it to be the quietest place on earth. It is an anechoic chamber on a residential scale. The walls are 3 feet thick, filled with sand and lead. The windows are quadruple-paned vacuum glass. It is designed to trap and eliminate all external vibration." "Why do you need a sitter?" I asked. "Because the house breathes," he said, which I thought was a metaphor. "The HVAC systems, the filtration, the structural integrity of the soundproofing, it needs monitoring. I have to go to Europe for a conference. I need someone who understands acoustics to watch the levels, to make sure the seal isn't broken. So I just sit there and make sure it stays quiet." "Yes," Thorne said. He leaned into the camera. "But David, you must understand. True silence is heavy. Most people cannot handle it. The brain creates noise when there is none. You have to be mentally distinct from your environment." I laughed. "Doc, I wear headphones for 12 hours a day. I love silence." He didn't smile. "We will see." I signed the NDA. I packed my bags. I drove 10 hours north, past the suburbs, past the farmland, deep into the dense forests of the Upper Peninsula. The GPS signal died about 20 miles out. I had to use a paper map Thorne had mailed me. The house was invisible until I was right on top of it. It was a brutalist structure, a block of dark concrete and black glass nestled in a valley. The trees around it had been cleared for 50 yards in every direction, replaced by a lawn of soft, mossy ground cover that absorbed footsteps. Thorne met me at the door. In person, he looked even worse. He was twitchy. He kept looking over his shoulder. "Here are the keys," he said, handing me a heavy ring. "Here is the logbook. You check the decibel meters in the basement, the kitchen, and the master bedroom twice a day. They should read 0, or as close to 0 as physics allows." "Got it. There is one rule," he said. He grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Do not make loud noises. No music, no shouting, no slamming doors. The house is designed to capture sound. If you saturate the dampeners, the pressure builds up." "Okay," I said, pulling my arm away. "I'll be quiet." "If you hear something," he whispered, looking at the black walls of the hallway, "do not listen to it. Distract yourself. Make a small noise like a hum, but do not listen to a house." He got in his car and drove away faster than I expected. I watched his tail lights vanish into the trees. I was alone. I turned around and stepped inside. The heavy steel front door swung shut on oiled hinges. It clicked into place. The silence hit me like a physical slap. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. In a normal quiet room, you can hear the refrigerator hum, or the wind outside, or the distant traffic. Here, there was nothing. It felt like cotton balls had been stuffed deep into my ear canals. The air felt thick, dead. I walked into the living room. My footsteps on the carpet were swallowed instantly. There was no reverberation, no echo. I spoke out loud just to test it. "Hello," I said. The word left my lips and died immediately. It sounded flat, dull, like I was speaking into a pillow. "Okay," I muttered. "Creepy, but cool." The first 3 days were actually pretty great. I caught up on reading. I wrote in my journal. I checked the meters. They all read 0.0 dB. Absolute silence. But by the 4th day, I started to understand what Thorne meant about the brain creating noise. When the external world is silent, your body becomes deafening. I could hear my heart beating, thump, 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 thump. It sounded like a drum in the room with me. I could hear the wet, squishing sound of my eyes moving in their sockets. I could hear the blood rushing through the veins in my neck, a high-pitched hiss like steam escaping a pipe. It was annoying, but manageable. I was a pro. I knew about psychoacoustics. The real trouble started on the 5th night. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich. I placed a ceramic plate on the granite counter. I wasn't careful. It made a sharp clack sound. In this house, that clack was like a gunshot. I winced. I stood there, waiting for the sound to fade, but in this house, sounds didn't fade. They were absorbed. It was instant silence again. I turned around to open the fridge. Clack! I froze. The sound came from behind me, from the counter. I turned back slowly. The plate was sitting there, still. Nothing had moved. "Hello?" I whispered 2 seconds later. "Hello?" It wasn't an echo. An echo is immediate. This was a delay. A distinct, perfect replay of my voice coming from the corner of the ceiling. But it sounded different. It sounded crisper. Clearer than my actual voice. It sounded like it had been EQ'd, compressed, and mastered. I laughed, nervously. Okay, weird acoustics, sound bouncing around the vents or something. I waited. The laugh didn't come back. Just the vents, I told myself. I took my sandwich to the living room and turned on the TV. I kept the volume very low, just a whisper. I watched a silent movie. That night, as I lay in the master bedroom in the absolute dark, I heard breathing. It was slow, rhythmic breathing, in, out, in, out. It was coming from directly above my face. I held my breath. The breathing continued. I reached for the lamp and clicked it on. The room was empty. The breathing stopped instantly. "It's my own breathing," I said aloud. "Just a delay. A weird acoustic reflection." I turned the light off. The breathing did not start again. Instead, a voice whispered right in my ear. "It's my own breathing." I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering, and turned the light back on. I slept with the lights on that night, day 7. I was checking the decibel meter in the basement. The basement was a concrete bunker. The walls were lined with black wedges of foam that looked like shark teeth. The meter sat on a pedestal in the center. It read 0.0 dB. I wrote it down in the logbook. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound. Drip. I stopped. I looked at the ceiling. No pipes. Drip. It sounded like water hitting a metal pan. Drip, drip. It was getting faster. I walked toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from the back wall, behind a layer of foam wedges. I reached out and pulled one of the foam triangles loose. Behind it, there was no concrete. There was a metal grate, and behind the grate, a dark, vertical shaft going down into the earth. Drip. "Hello?" I called down the shaft. Silence. I waited for the echo. I waited for the delay. Nothing came back. But then a sound began to rise from the shaft. It wasn't a voice. It was a tone, a low-frequency hum. It was almost below the range of hearing. I felt it in my teeth before I heard it, a vibration rattling my jawbone. I put the foam wedge back and ran upstairs. I locked the basement door. I called Dr. Thorne. His phone went straight to voicemail. "Thorne, it's David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The house is acting up. I'm hearing delays, long delays, and there's a shaft in the basement. Call me back." I hung up. I sat in the living room. The silence was pressing in on me. I felt like I was underwater. The air pressure felt immense. Then the house started to talk. It wasn't speaking words. It was replaying my week. From the kitchen, I heard the clack of the plate. From the hallway, I heard my footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. From the bathroom, I heard the sound of the shower running. Shh! It was all happening at once. A cacophony of my own life played back to me, but it was all wrong. The timing was off. The footsteps were too heavy. The plate sound was too sharp. "Stop it!" I yelled. The house went silent instantly. Then from every corner of the room, from the walls, from the floor, a chorus of my own voice screamed back at me, "Stop it!" The volume was 10 times louder than I had yelled. It shook the windows. It made my ears pop. I grabbed my coat. I was leaving. To hell with the money. To hell with the contract. I ran to the front door. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. It wasn't locked. It felt like it was held shut by suction. A massive vacuum. Pressure, sealing it tight. I pulled with both hands, bracing my foot against the wall. I screamed with effort, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" The house chanted in a loop, layering my voice over and over until it sounded like a demonic choir. I gave up on the door. I ran to the back sliding glass door. It was triple-paned, bulletproof glass. I tried to slide it. Stuck. I picked up a heavy cast-iron sculpture from the side table and smashed it against the glass. Bang! The glass didn't even scratch. The sound of the impact was incredibly loud, and the house loved it. Bang! 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 The echo repeated, louder each time. The floorboards vibrated. I covered my ears and ran to the center of the house, to the hallway, trying to get away from the noise I had created. The noise stopped. I stood there, panting, sweating. My hands were shaking. I needed to calm down. Thorne said if I saturated the dampeners, pressure builds up. I was feeding it. I was feeding the house with noise. "Quiet," I whispered to myself. "Be quiet." I sat on the floor in the hallway. I closed my eyes. I focused on my breathing. Slow, steady. An hour passed. The silence returned. The heavy, cotton wool silence. I opened my eyes. Standing at the end of the hallway was a man. He was facing away from me. He was wearing clothes that looked like mine. Jeans, a flannel shirt. "Who are you?" I whispered. The man didn't turn around, but he spoke. "Who are you?" It was my voice, but it wasn't coming from his mouth. It was coming from his entire body, vibrating off him like he was a speaker cone. He took a step forward. Thump! The sound of the footstep was delayed. He stepped, and 2 seconds later, the sound happened. He took another step. Thump! He was walking backward, toward me. I scrambled back, crab walking away. "Get away from me!" The figure stopped. It slowly turned its head. It didn't have a face. Where the face should be, there was just acoustic foam. Black, jagged wedges of foam growing out of the skin, forming a pyramid pattern where eyes and a mouth should be. The foam face shifted. the wedges grinding together. A sound came from it, not a voice. It was the sound of the plate breaking, crack. Then the sound of the shower, shh. Then the sound of me sleeping, in, out. It was a compilation of me. I stood up and ran. I ran up the stairs to the second floor. I ran into the guest bedroom and slammed the door. I locked it. I pushed the bed against the door. I huddled in the corner. It's not real, I chanted. It's hallucination, sensory deprivation. Knock, knock, knock. 3 polite knocks on the bedroom door. I didn't answer. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. Then a voice came through the door. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't Thorne's. It was a woman's voice. Soft, melodic. David, are you in there? I froze. Mom? My mother lives in Florida. She has never been to Michigan. David, open the door. It's too loud out here. Let me in. You're not my mother, I sobbed. David. The voice changed. It became deep, guttural. Open the door. The door handle jiggled. Then the door bowed inward. The wood creaked. I looked at the window. It was sealed glass. I couldn't break it. I looked at the vent in the ceiling. The HVAC returned. It was large enough for a person. I dragged the desk under the vent. I stood on it. I used my keys to unscrew the grate. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. Bang! The bedroom door splintered. A black foam-covered hand reached through the hole, groping for the lock. I got the grate off. I pulled myself up into the ductwork. It was tight, dark. It smelled of dust and old metal. I crawled. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away from that room. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door smash open. Then I heard the sound of me crawling, scrape, shuffle. But it was coming from behind me. It was following me into the vents. David, the house whispered from the metal walls. We are still recording. I crawled faster. The metal cut my knees. I was sobbing quietly. I saw a light ahead. A grate looking down into a room I hadn't seen before. I crawled to it and looked down. It was a room lined entirely with copper, no foam, just shining copper plates on the walls, floor, and ceiling. In the center of the room sat a chair, and in the chair sat a man. It was Dr. Thorne. He was strapped to the chair. He looked dead. I kicked the grate. It gave way. I fell into the room, landing hard on the copper floor. Clang! The sound was deafening. The copper amplified it. It rang like a massive bell. I rolled over, clutching my ears. I looked at Thorne. He wasn't dead. His eyes opened. They were gone. His eyes were gone. His ears were gone. They had been surgically removed. His mouth was sewn shut. He was vibrating. His entire body was shaking, vibrating with the resonance of the room. On the wall, painted in what looked like blood, were words. The resonance chamber. I stood up. Thorne was trying to scream through his sewn lips. Mph. Mph. Then I noticed the wires. Thorne was hooked up to machines. Wires ran from his skull into a bank of servers against the wall. He wasn't the owner. He was the battery. He was the source. The door to the copper room opened. The foam-faced creature stood there. It held a recorder in its hand, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. It pressed play. A sound came out. It was a frequency, a tone so low and so loud it made my vision blur. It made my stomach churn. I fell to my knees. The creature walked toward me. It placed the recorder on the floor. It leaned down. The foam wedges on its face parted, revealing a dark, endless hole. Record, it whispered. I realized then what this house was. It wasn't keeping sound out. It was harvesting it. It was a collector. and it had run out of sounds from Thorn. It needed new material. It needed my screams. I looked at the server bank, the wires. If I couldn't escape the sound, I had to kill the silence. I grabbed a heavy copper bust from a shelf. The creature lunged at me. I dodged, swinging the bust with everything I had. Not at the creature, at the servers. Crash. Sparks flew. The machines whined and died. Crash. I smashed the reel-to-reel player. The tape spilled out like guts. The creature shrieked. It was a sound of pure digital glitching, a corrupted audio file screaming in agony. Its form flickered. It wasn't solid. It was a standing wave, a construct of sound. As the machines died, the standing wave collapsed. The creature dissolved into thin air, leaving only a pile of black foam wedges on the floor. The humming stopped. Thorn slumped in his chair, dead. The vibration had kept his heart beating. Without it, he was just a corpse. I ran out of the copper room. I ran through the basement. I found the front door. I pushed it. It opened easily. The vacuum seal was broken. I ran into the night. The forest was loud. Crickets, wind, owls. It was the most beautiful noise I had ever heard. I ran until I reached the main road. I flagged down a logging truck. I didn't tell the driver what happened. I just told him my car broke down. I went to the police eventually. I told them about the house, about Thorn. They went to the location I marked on the map. They found nothing, just a concrete foundation in the woods. No house, no copper room, no foam. They told me I must have gotten the coordinates wrong. They told me Dr. Thorn had been reported missing 6 months ago, last seen in Europe. But I know what happened. The house didn't disappear. It moved. It moved to a quieter spot. And I know it's not done with me, because now I can't hear silence anymore. When I'm in a quiet room, I don't hear nothing. I hear the delay. I hear conversations I had yesterday. I hear my own footsteps from an hour ago. And sometimes, when I am trying to sleep, I hear a new sound. I hear the sound of a typewriter. Click, clack, click. But I don't own a typewriter. I am writing this on a typewriter in the library. But the sound I hear isn't coming from my fingers. It's coming from inside my pillows. And underneath the clicking, if I listen very closely, I can hear a voice made of static and foam. We are still recording, David. Side B is just beginning. I am going to puncture my eardrums now. It is the only way to stop the recording. I have the pencil ready. Goodbye.